Everything was stolen from her by her frail little sister, and now Colette Miriact swears never to let anyone take anything from her again. Dion breaks Colette's heart by coldly announcing he is marrying her younger sister, Liliane, instead. Liliane wears a deceptive, innocent smile while standing triumphantly by the man she just stole. The betrayal is absolute as Colette realizes her own little sister has systematically dismantled her life. With a single move, Liliane successfully steals Colette's fiancé and leaves her with nothing. Liliane cruelly claims she is disappointed in her older sister while mentioning that their parents and Dion-sama have all turned their backs on Colette. Hiding behind her physical weakness, Liliane asserts that she can no longer leave the family's future to Colette. Liliane vows to take over House Miriact and become the one to support Dion-sama herself. Colette stands devastated as she recalls her frail sister's words, questioning if this tragic outcome is truly acceptable. The realization sinks in that Liliane has stripped away every single thing Colette once held dear. Colette Miriact was born the eldest daughter of the prestigious House Miriact, destined for a life of responsibility. In her shadow lived her younger sister, Liliane, who would eventually become her greatest rival. Unlike the healthy Colette, Liliane Miriact was born sickly and spent much of her time confined to a bed. Because of her constant illness, Liliane was always treated like a precious princess by everyone around her. Colette watched from the sidelines, unable to blame her parents for only caring about her weak sister. While her parents stayed by Liliane's side, Colette was left to spend her lonely childhood with only maids and tutors. Deep down, a bitter jealousy began to take root in Colette's heart as she watched the attention her sister received. To compensate for her sister's frailty, Colette was forced to work twice as hard and constantly hold back her own desires. She wonders why her parents never looked at her and why she was the only one expected to sacrifice. In her moments of frustration, she wished her family would show her at least a little bit of gratitude for her efforts. Tears well up in Colette's eyes as she struggles with the pain of being the invisible daughter. The weight of her jealousy becomes an unbearable burden as she watches her sister's easy life. Liliane was loved and cherished by everyone without ever having to lift a single finger. All Liliane had to do was smile, and every mistake she made was instantly forgiven by her doting parents. Colette wonders what she must do to be loved like that, acknowledging that Liliane is sweet and adorable. She resolves to at least finish the daily tasks her parents assigned to her, hoping to find some value in her work. Liliane excitedly demands a story, reminding Colette of the nightly routine they shared. Colette's daily task was to recount everything that happened to her throughout the day for Liliane's entertainment. These moments were once precious to Colette, but as time passed, they transformed into an unbearable chore. If Colette ever failed to show up, Liliane would immediately tattle to their parents to get her in trouble. Colette finishes the day's story, ending another night of forced interaction with her sister. Liliane always ends their sessions by telling Colette how much she envies her perfect older sister. Colette scoffs in silence, knowing that if she expressed her own envy, it would only end up hurting the frail Liliane. By the time she turned 12, Colette finally made her official debut into high society. Attending parties and tea gatherings became the only time Colette felt truly free from her home life. Amidst the glittering crowd, Colette's eyes are suddenly drawn to a mysterious figure across the room. She notices a boy in plain clothes and wonders if he is the son of a lower-ranking nobleman like a viscount or baron. The lonely look in the boy's eyes feels strangely familiar to Colette, resonating with her own hidden isolation. Driven by a sudden impulse, she approaches him and asks if he would mind chatting with her for a bit. Colette introduces herself and asks the boy if he likes sweets, trying to break through his guarded exterior. She offers him snacks and suggests they share stories together, mirroring the tasks she does at home but with genuine interest. Though the boy is hesitant to open up, Colette finds herself captivated by his quiet presence. She realizes he won't be easy to befriend, but she remains determined to reach him. After talking quite a bit, she gently asks if he wouldn't mind sharing his name with her. The boy finally looks at her and simply introduces himself as Van. Colette stares at him, her eyes bright with the hope of a new and genuine connection. From that night on, the two would seek each other out and talk whenever they met at social gatherings. Colette brings treats for Van, making sure to care for him during their secret meetings. She playfully teases him for being so small and thin, telling him he needs to eat much more to grow. Van quietly insists he is full, unable to keep up with Colette's enthusiastic mothering. Colette tells him he must grow up strong so that he can come find her again someday. Van gives a soft, okay, a rare smile touching his face as they share a moment of pure joy. Overwhelmed by her feelings, Colette happily confesses that she really loves being with Van. Van blushes and thanks her, admitting that he likes her very much as well. Colette stands in stunned silence, touched by the first genuine confession of affection she has ever received. She breaks down in tears, explaining to a concerned Van that her family has never once told her they loved her. Van looks at her with deep empathy and reveals that he is exactly the same as she is. To cement their bond, Colette reveals she has brought a special gift for him. She presents a simple toy ring she bought from a trinket shop, a humble but meaningful token. Colette places the matching rose ring on her finger, hoping they can always be connected by this shared secret. A heartfelt, "thank you," marks the beginning of a story centered on a mysterious gift. Giggling at his dramatic flair, the young woman promises to treasure the item he holds forever. With a rose-shaped ring sparkling on her finger, she bursts through the doors to introduce someone special to her parents. Her arrival at the family estate is met with a cold, formal atmosphere as her parents look on with stern expressions. "Enough already," her mother screams, reacting with pure rage at the mention of a boy she is interested in. The young woman is left speechless and trembling, a single tear falling as she reels from the unexpected slap. Her mother coldly reveals that several high-ranking fiancé candidates have already been selected for her. She is informed that her sole duty is to marry into a specific family and inherit the prestigious House Mangarecapped. The mother barks at the father to be more considerate of Liliane, who watches the scene with a frail, innocent look. Liliane tearfully apologizes, blaming her own weak body for the trouble and causing their mother to glare at the protagonist. Her parents berate her for being shameless and chasing boys while her sister, Liliane, is clearly suffering. She tries to protest that her intentions were misunderstood, but her words fall on deaf ears. The protagonist falls to the floor in shock as her family towers over her with overwhelming hostility. In a chilling moment, Liliane casts a dark, sinister smile that betrays her fragile persona. Prostrate on the ground, the young woman begins to realize the true nature of the sister she tried to protect. The protagonist's blood runs cold as she confirms Liliane is indeed smiling at her misfortune. Convinced that Liliane's malice is real, she is horrified when her parents ban her from ever going outside again. Locked away in her room, she questions her place in the family and what she even means to them. Determined to regain favor, she handles all her father's work efficiently until he finally seems pleased. Months later, she is finally granted her freedom and immediately rushes out to find Van. She searches the crowded halls desperately, calling out Van's name under the shimmering chandeliers. No matter how hard she searches, the man she loves is gone without a trace. From that point on, 6 long years pass without a single glimpse of Van, leaving her in despair. Time jumps forward as her father calls out for Colette, signaling a new turn in her fate. Her father brusquely announces that he has officially picked a fiancé for her and demands she hurry up. Colette rushes through the palace arches, wondering about the identity of the man she is meant to marry. She arrives with an apology for the wait, her mind racing with curiosity about her future husband. To her absolute horror, the man standing before her is someone she never expected to see. The man introduces himself as Dion Fervor, greeting Colette with a charming but suspicious smile. Colette formally introduces herself as Colette Mangarecapped, while Dion looks at her with a predatory gaze. Colette's friends, including Elsa and Alexia, have warned her that Dion is the absolute worst choice possible. Though he appears charming, Dion is the 3rd son of the Fervor ducal family and carries a terrible reputation. Rumors suggest he is a constant source of trouble whenever he ventures into town. The list of his sins is long. He ruined his ex-fiancée's family and spends money with reckless abandon. Colette clutches her head in agony, fearing that marriage to such a man will lead House Mangarecapped to ruin. In contrast, Liliane is delighted, praising Dion as a wonderful man and feigning jealousy over the match. Colette can only offer a hollow response as she processes the nightmare of her engagement. Liliane gushes over Dion, claiming he looks just like a prince and expressing mock envy toward her dear sister. "I'm glad you think so," Colette replies diplomatically, thanking Liliane for the empty sentiment. Liliane's obsession grows as she blushes over Dion saying her name, while Colette is told to take care of him. While walking in the garden, Colette confronts Dion directly about his reputation as a notorious playboy. Dion scoffs at the accusation, daring her to do something about his scandalous behavior. Colette looks on with a mixture of suspicion and resolve, realizing her life is about to become a battlefield. The grand estate looms in the background, a silent witness to the escalating family drama. Lillian celebrates gleefully, announcing that Dion has invited her, not Colette, to a party. As Lillian picks out a dress, it is noted that her health has miraculously improved and she hasn't coughed in years. Colette watches them leave in a carriage, worried that it is far too soon for the uneducated Lillian to debut in society. A sense of dread washes over Colette as she watches her sister and her fiancé disappear from view. Late at night, Lillian returns in a state of distress, crying out for her parents as she stages a dramatic scene. Lillian falsely accuses Colette of humiliating her and getting violent with her at the party. Colette stands in total shock, unable to comprehend the blatant lies her sister is telling. A flashback reveals the truth. Lillian was the one acting like a spoiled brat and being rude to high-ranking nobles. Colette had no choice but to drag her home to stop the disaster, despite Lillian's aggressive resistance. Despite her efforts to save the family name, her parents look at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. The father seizes Colette and drags her away, ignoring her cries of confusion and innocence. "Don't come out," he bellows, locking Colette in a dark room as punishment for harming her sister. Colette is devastated, knowing she was only trying to prevent Lillian from causing a social catastrophe. She laments the fact that her parents always find a way to twist the truth and blame her for everything. Shivering in a cold, dark shed, Colette is deprived of proper food and water as she huddles for warmth. Her father's voice echoes through the bars, cruelly reminding her that she is still expected to work even while imprisoned. Colette is harshly berated by her father for her supposedly poor attitude while she silently endures the verbal abuse in a stone-walled room. Frustrated and exhausted by the toxic environment, Colette laments that her household has become completely hopeless. Sitting alone among wooden crates, she wonders how many months have passed since her life fell into this cycle of misery. She realizes with growing bitterness that no matter how much she sacrifices for this family, her efforts remain entirely meaningless. Feeling like nothing more than a slave, Colette describes the sensation of being slowly drained dry by her family's demands. A maid knocks on the heavy wooden door, prompting Colette to realize that she must finally leave this place for good. The door creaks open as the maid announces the sudden and unexpected arrival of Dion-sama. Startled and confused, Colette wonders why Dion is visiting now as the maid leads her toward the meeting. Colette is overcome with an intense, ominous feeling as she spots Lillian clinging to Dion's side. The group gathers in a lavishly decorated room where a tense confrontation is about to unfold. Lillian mockingly informs Colette that their father, mother, and even Dion-sama have grown completely disappointed in her. Claiming Colette is useless because she cannot manage the estate, Lillian prepares to deliver a final, crushing blow. With a triumphant smile, Lillian declares that she will take Colette's place to support both Dion-sama and House Mangarecap. Lillian gloats over her victory, relishing the moment she has been waiting for. Colette stands frozen in shock as she realizes her own sister has systematically stolen everything from her. The betrayal sinks in deeply as Colette stares at the pair with a look of utter disbelief. Trembling with rage and hurt, Colette asks Lillian if she is actually serious about this heartless takeover. Dion offers a cold, dismissive apology to Colette, confirming his intention to marry Lillian instead. Colette gasps in horror as the man she trusted turns his back on her so casually. Dion adds that the paperwork for the transition is already being processed with the Earl of Mangarecap. Putting on a fake show of pity, Lillian begs Dion not to blame her sister, claiming she still wants to be there for her. Lillian gives a sinister smile while asking Colette if she will stay and support their new union. Colette is visibly shaken, her face contorted with the realization of the nightmare she is expected to live through. Revolted by the suggestion, Colette realizes she would rather die than spend her life serving Lillian and Dion. Dion warns Colette to watch her behavior and keep her mouth shut since she is no longer the heir to the house. Colette looks down, her eyes shadowed as she reaches a breaking point of silent fury. With a chilling calmness, Colette simply states that she no longer needs any of it. Shouting over their confusion, Colette declares at the top of her lungs that she doesn't need anything from them anymore. Lillian is shocked by the outburst, claiming they had already offered to forgive her for her failures. Lillian cries out for her parents, feigning distress while accusing Colette of refusing to listen to her plans for the house. Their father storms in, shouting that they should have let Lillian inherit from the start while calling Colette a mere support. Realizing she was a fool to ever crave their love, Colette looks at her family with newfound clarity and disdain. In a voice like ice, Colette firmly refuses to comply with any of their demands. Her father is stunned into silence by her defiance, unable to believe she is standing up to him. Colette stares them down and announces that from this moment on, she will never return to this house. Her father explodes in a rage, branding her an ungrateful brat for daring to walk away. Colette turns her back on the shouting man, her eyes fixed on a pair of scissors on the vanity. She reaches out a steady hand, prepared to sever the final tie to her former life. In a sudden, swift motion, Colette raises the scissors to her long, beautiful hair. The family watches in absolute horror as Colette begins to hack away at her own locks. Ignoring their desperate pleas to stop, Colette continues to cut, symbolizing the death of her identity as their daughter. Standing amidst her fallen hair, Colette looks transformed, her expression cold and resolute. The room falls into a deathly silence as the family stares at the unrecognizable woman before them. Colette's gaze is sharp and piercing, showing no trace of the sister they once manipulated. Stunned by her intensity, Dion and Liliane can only watch as Colette prepares to make her exit. With a final, graceful curtsy of mockery, Colette bids them a permanent goodbye. She walks toward the exit, leaving the shattered remains of her past on the floor. As she leaves, her father screams after her that she is officially disowned and must never show her face again. Colette smiles to herself, unbothered by being disowned and determined not to let this trouble her true friends. She prepares a candle to burn every letter they ever sent her, erasing every trace of their influence. Reflecting on a lifetime of quiet endurance, Colette leaps from the window toward her new freedom. She disappears into the dark woods, running fast and leaving the mangarecapped estate behind her. A genuine, radiant smile finally breaks across her face as she tastes true independence for the first time. The morning sun begins to rise over the horizon, signaling the start of a new chapter. A lone carriage travels down a dusty road, carrying Colette far away from her former prison. Sometime later, a woman reports to a mysterious figure that Colette mangarecapped has vanished and her whereabouts are unknown. The figure orders the woman to continue the search at all costs. The mysterious man sits in shadow, his posture tense as he contemplates Colette's disappearance. He holds a delicate rose-shaped ring in his palm, a silent memento of the woman who fled. Clenching his fist over the jewelry, the man remains silent, fueled by an obsessive need to find her. A somber man in ornate attire looks out from a window, his thoughts consumed by a desperate plea for Colette to wait for him. The story transitions into a new chapter, setting the stage for the journey ahead. A lone horse-drawn wagon carries two travelers through a dense, shadowy forest as the sun begins to set. Shivering in the back of the wagon, a young girl named Colette clutches her cloak and laments the rapidly dropping temperature. Colette hops down from the transport and hands a small bag to the driver, thanking him for his kindness. The wagon pulls away into the distance, leaving the girl standing alone at the edge of the woods. Under the glow of a crescent moon, Colette realizes with a start that there isn't a single soul around her. She reflects on the long night of walking, considering it a miracle she hasn't encountered any thieves or traffickers yet. A painful memory flashes back of her being disowned and cast out by her furious family. She realizes that despite her previous status as a praised noble's daughter, she is now completely powerless outside her former home. Determination fills her eyes as she decides that any hardship is better than rotting away in that house. The girl continues her lonely trek deeper into the forest, her small figure dwarfed by the towering trees. Exhaustion finally takes its toll, and Colette lets out a heavy sigh as she feels herself about to collapse. She pushes herself to keep moving, knowing that if she stops now, she will surely die in the cold. Hunger gnaws at her as she remembers that she has eaten absolutely nothing for the past 2 weeks. The landscape begins to blur and warp before her eyes as her strength reaches its absolute limit. Groaning in pain, she rubs her eyes, but her vision remains dangerously blurry. Even as she stumbles, she refuses to regret her choice, reaffirming that she picked this path herself. Tears well up as she wishes she could have thanked those who were kind to her one last time. She thinks fondly of Alexia and Elsa, the only friends who ever truly stood by her side. One final name lingers in her mind, a person she deeply misses. She whispers the name Van as she sinks to her knees against a large boulder. Her final wish is to see Van just once more before the end. Sobbing quietly, Colette clutches her chest, her spirit nearly broken by the cold and isolation. The girl finally loses consciousness, her body going limp against the hard stone. The scene shifts to the bustling and majestic kingdom of Ivalorot. A luxury carriage travels down a sunlit road, guarded by an air of nobility. Inside, A man with sharp features and long earrings reflects on the blood and sweat he spent to reach the end of his road. He admits his life has been fueled only by revenge, yet he yearns for one more chance to speak with her. He wonders if a betrayer like him even deserves to face her after hearing she left the country. Suddenly, his eyes widen in shock as he spots a familiar figure collapsed by a rock outside the window. He screams for the driver to stop the carriage, unable to believe his eyes. The man leaps from the vehicle before it even fully halts, rushing toward the fallen girl. He gathers the unconscious Colette into his arms, trembling as he wonders how she ended up all the way out here. Desperation fills his voice as he calls out her name, praying that it is really her. He looks at her tattered state and wonders if she has been suffering like this ever since that fateful day. Cradling her protectively, he refuses to accept the cruel reality of her condition. He barks orders to his subordinates to take them to the manor immediately, calling her the most important person in his life. As he carries her away, his confused servants whisper among themselves, wondering who the mysterious girl could be. The guards quickly comply, though they are visibly shaken by their master's sudden emotional outburst. The carriage speeds away, leaving the desolate forest behind. As she begins to stir, Colette feels an unfamiliar sense of warmth surrounding her. A soothing voice tells her she is safe and can stay at peace for as long as she wants. The man looks down at her with a gentle, rare smile, his previous hardness completely vanished. Colette slowly blinks her eyes open, confused by the soft bed and the strange surroundings. She wakes to find the man sitting by her side, softly wishing her a good morning. The girl stares at him in a daze, her mind struggling to process where she is or who is with her. Panic sets in as she wonders if she has been kidnapped or sold to a brothel. The man remains silent, watching her with a complicated expression as she reacts to his presence. He gently asks if she is feeling cold, his tone soft and concerned. He offers to get her something warm so she doesn't freeze, trying to calm her rising fears. He reveals that she has been sleeping for 2 full days and expresses his genuine relief that she is all right. Overwhelmed, Colette manages to bow and thank him for saving her life. She studies his face, feeling a nagging sense of familiarity but unable to place where she has seen him before. The man notices her gaze and asks if they have met before, testing to see if she recognizes him. He tells her not to worry about anything and to just rest while her body recovers. Colette tries to protest, but she is clearly still too weak to argue. A maid named Mimi enters the room, announcing that she will be caring for Colette from now on. Colette is shocked by the name and asks if the maid is from the legendary Shimei Empire. It is revealed that the Shimei Empire is a massive territory, many times larger than the kingdom of Ivalarat. Over 20 years ago, the Ivalarat royal couple struggled with infertility, leading the 8th princess of Shimei to enter the union as a concubine and bear a son. Tragic rumors persist regarding the concubine's sudden illness and death, even as the queen eventually gave birth to her own son years later. Dismissed by the kingdom, the concubine's eldest son was never officially acknowledged and is widely believed to have died alongside his mother. A past attempt to marry the unacknowledged prince to Lillian failed due to her fragile state of health. A servant offers a warming meal to a weary guest. Steam rises from a freshly prepared cup of tea set upon a delicate saucer. Waking in unfamiliar surroundings, Colette fearfully wonders if she has been brought to a brothel. A masked attendant quickly corrects her, clarifying that the estate is not a place of ill repute. The attendant, Mimi, urges a startled Colette to eat and regain her strength. Colette gazes up in confusion as the masked woman ensures she is all right. Questions race through Colette's mind as she wonders why she is being fed if this isn't a place of work. Catching a glimpse of a refined man, Colette wonders if he is the master of the estate. The mysterious man seems to know exactly who she is, leaving Colette baffled by his familiarity. Despite being certain they have never met, Colette finds she cannot get the man out of her head. Startled by a sudden realization, Colette sits up abruptly in her bed. Remembering her hunger, she realizes she hasn't eaten a single thing yet. The savory aroma of the hot meal before her is incredibly enticing. She lifts a spoonful of the nourishing food, ready to take her first bite. Colette finally tastes the meal provided for her. Overwhelmed by the gentle, delicious flavor, Colette begins to weep as she eats. The ornate interior of the estate stands quiet and still. Finishing her meal, she offers a quiet prayer of gratitude for the food. Gazing out at the stunning view, Colette marvels at the fact that she can still feel such wonder. Exhaustion pulls at her again as she feels sleep beginning to take hold. Colette drifts back into a peaceful slumber within the large, comfortable bed. A soft knock precedes the master and Mimi as they enter the room to check on her. The pair stands quietly by the bedside of the sleeping girl. Seeing her at rest, the master observes that she has finally fallen asleep. Colette remains deep in sleep, her face showing the toll of her past hardships. A hand reaches out toward the sleeping girl as a silent presence lingers. The master demands to know who drove her to such a breaking point as Mimi stands ready. Mimi reports that Euro's team is currently investigating the matter. Driven by protective fury, the master orders more people for the search to get results faster. Mimi acknowledges the command, vowing to begin the expanded investigation immediately. The master declares with cold certainty that he will never let whoever hurt Colette get away with it. Colette's peaceful expression contrasts with the dark memories beginning to surface in her mind. Memories of her father's cold ultimatum resurface, commanding her to live in the shadows to support her sister. She recalls her internal struggle and the weight of taking her father's place despite having no voice. Her mother cruelly justifies the sacrifice, claiming no noble would want a wife who bullies her fragile sister, Liliane. Heartbroken by the cruelty, Colette realizes she never truly mattered to her own mother. Liliane selfishly claims she deserves a fiancé after being sick for so long. Her sister mocks her, demanding she stay and continue supporting their happiness. Haunted by her family's disappointment, Colette despairs over how much more she is expected to give up. The word disappointed echoes in her mind as she reaches her absolute limit. Colette screams out in terror, waking violently from the nightmare. She gasps for breath, trembling as she sits up in the vast, empty room. The master rushes to her side in a panic, calling out her name. Her eyes are wide with lingering fear from the visions of her past. In an instinctive move of comfort, the master pulls the sobbing Colette into a protective embrace. He desperately asks if she is all right, his voice full of concern. Hovering over her, he asks if she had a nightmare or if she is in physical pain. Colette struggles to find her voice, stammering in the wake of her distress. The master looks at her with such intense sorrow that he begs her not to cry. Colette is struck by his expression, wondering why he looks like he is the one in pain. She remains held in his arms, feeling the warmth of his embrace. They share a quiet, charged moment as he gazes down at her with newfound tenderness. Their eyes lock in a moment of silent, mutual realization. He confesses that it is hard to act normal when she looks at him with such a sweet face. Blushing, he apologizes for his forwardness while she is still recovering. Colette's heart flutters in confusion, wondering if they have truly only just met. A man in ornate attire reassures Colette that he is glad she ate well yesterday and notes it is almost time for another meal. The man suddenly stands to leave, prompting a startled Colette to reach out as she realizes he is departing. Colette's hand extends toward the man, her fingers grazing the air in a desperate attempt to stop his exit. Wide-eyed and breathless, Colette lets out a soft gasp as she struggles to process the man's sudden movement. The man pauses and turns back, softly calling Colette's name to get her attention. An elegant close-up reveals the man's calm, handsome face as he looks back at the bewildered young woman. The doors slide open with a click as an attendant arrives with a food cart to begin the meal service. Noticing her distress, the man gently asks Colette if something is wrong while she stammers out a confused response. Internal panic seizes Colette as she beats herself up for her improper behavior and impulsive reaction. The attendant positions the food cart while the man remains partially in view, maintaining the quiet atmosphere of the room. Offering a seat, the man invites Colette to join him as the meal is prepared for serving. With a graceful motion, the man lifts a silver dome to reveal the hot dish waiting underneath. Colette watches intently as a spoonful of steaming food is lifted toward her. The man holds the spoon out and kindly encourages Colette to open her mouth for a bite. Flustered and blushing, Colette reacts with shock at the intimate gesture of being fed. Obediently, Colette takes a bite of the food, her cheeks flushed with lingering embarrassment. The man smiles warmly, asking Colette if the food is at a comfortable temperature for her. Colette sits quietly as the man continues to attend to her, her mind racing with newfound realizations. Struck by his beauty, Colette thinks about how handsome he is while the man expresses his quiet satisfaction. The man catches her staring, his gaze lingering on her as a soft, intimate moment passes between them. A light-hearted blush creeps onto his face as he admits he'll get embarrassed if she keeps staring at him like that. Colette is frozen in place, her heart pounding as she searches for a way to respond to his playful teasing. The man laughs softly and asks if her staring is simply her way of asking for more food. A deep, internal question haunts Colette as she stares at the man, wondering who he truly is. The man turns his head slightly, his expression turning pensive as the weight of his hidden identity lingers in the air. Colette questions the man's motives, wondering why he is being so incredibly kind to her. The man's profile remains elegant and mysterious, his silent gaze suggesting a history yet to be revealed. As he feeds her another bite, Colette remains lost in her thoughts, her eyes fixed on his familiar features. The man somberly admits that Colette would only be hurt if he were to reveal his true name. Colette lets out a confused "huh" as she tries to grasp the meaning behind his cryptic warning. He explains that he would rather stay silent than be the reason she cries. Acknowledging the awkwardness, he notes it must feel unsettling to be cared for by a total stranger. The man reflects on her lonely eyes, a look he seems to recognize from a time long ago. Colette struggles with a growing realization, wondering why she didn't notice the similarities to someone from her past sooner. Despite the familiar feeling, she notes that his presence, demeanor, and even his voice are entirely different. Memories of a past proposal and an old love named Van flood Colette's mind, bringing back waves of emotion. In the memory, Van smiles brightly and thanks Colette, telling her that he likes her too. Colette recalls that day as the happiest of her life, a bittersweet contrast to her current situation. She wonders if her precious matching toy ring is gone for good, hidden away with her burned letters. The pain of losing Van remains a sharp ache in her chest, feeling as fresh as a knife wound. She remembers Van was supposed to be a highborn son, making it impossible for this man to be him. The man sits in silence, his head bowed as if carrying the weight of the very secrets Colette is questioning. Colette recalls how the quiet, slender Van disappeared so suddenly from her life. She notes a key difference, remembering that the Van she knew never smiled like the man before her. The man looks at her and confirms her thoughts with a soft smile, validating her memory. Colette describes the old Van as thin, messy-haired, and even smaller in stature than she was. A close-up of the man's gentle smile underscores his reaction to her detailed description of her past love. Colette is left speechless, her eyes wide as she searches the man's face for any sign of the boy she once knew. Overwhelmed with emotion, Colette clings to the man and asks why he won't deny his identity if it isn't true. The words die in her throat as she struggles to ask why he never came back for her. The man reaches into his collar and pulls out a chain, revealing a familiar object hidden beneath his clothes. He explains that something happened the night she gave him the ring, forcing him to flee the country. Colette recognizes the ring immediately, knowing there is no way she could mistake the token from that day. With tears in her eyes, Colette finally asks the question directly, wondering if it is truly him. The man smiles broadly and confirms the truth, telling her simply that he has come back. He apologizes for being weak in the past and for his sudden disappearance when she was hurting. The man looks at her with deep affection, promising that he has never once forgotten about her. Shifting back to his current care, he insists that Colette needs to eat because she is still too thin. He offers another spoonful of food, but Colette insists she is already full from the emotional revelation. The man teases her about being skinny, and Colette recalls her past promise to wait for him to get stronger. Van gazes warmly at Colette, asking if she still remembers the words he used to say to her. With a gentle and knowing smile, he confirms her thoughts with a simple, "Of course." Colette weeps into her hands, admitting she truly believed she would never see him again. Sitting closely together by the window, Colette looks up in surprise as Van reaffirms his presence there with her. Van offers a radiant smile, tenderly pleading for Colette to stay there with him. He promises to provide her with everything she needs and instructs her to simply inform Mimi of her wishes. The door slides shut with a firm click, leaving Colette alone with her swirling thoughts. Despite his overwhelming kindness, Colette's heart aches because he is protecting her without even knowing her full story. A full week passes in the tranquil, scenic estate following their emotional reunion. True to his word, Van spends several hours by Colette's side every single day. They pass the time peacefully, sharing tea and snacking on various sweets together. The pair bonds deeply while reading books and sharing stories, filling Colette with unbelievable happiness. She is treated to a constant parade of exotic and delicious meals. Her days are filled with luxury, including specialized care for her hair and skin along with baths filled with floating flower petals. Looking at her vibrant reflection in the mirror, Colette feels alive again but worries the lifestyle is too grand for someone like her. Guilt gnaws at her as she realizes she has nothing to give Van in return and feels she doesn't deserve such treatment. She assumes that by now, she has been officially disowned by House Mangarecapped, making her former status irrelevant. Briefly, she wonders if Dion is capable of handling Liliane in her absence. Shaking off the past, she resolves to stop dwelling on her old life and focus entirely on what comes next. The ornate lanterns hang still from the ceiling of the quiet, sunlit room. Van approaches Colette with a look of surprise, noting he heard from Mimi that she wants to start working. Determined, Colette explains she wants to learn the Shimei language and become useful instead of just relying on everyone's kindness. Van is visibly taken back, questioning why she would ever say something like that. Colette blinks in confusion at his sudden, intense reaction. Van reaches out and firmly grips Colette's arm, his expression darkening. His face contorts with a pained, desperate grimace as he struggles to process her words. Colette realizes Van still views her as a highborn count's daughter, which is why he is trying to stop her from working. She knows she cannot depend on him forever and decides it is finally time to tell him the truth. Steeling her nerves, she looks him in the eye and says there is something important she needs to tell him. She worries that once he hears the whole story, he may no longer allow her to stay by his side. Van stares back at her, his gaze heavy and expectant. Colette begins her confession, repeating that there is a truth she must finally share. Van reacts with a sharp, shocked gasp as the weight of the moment hits him. A heavy silence falls between them as Colette looks down, her face shadowed by anxiety. She fears Van will be disgusted to learn she is no longer the daughter of a noble. Colette justifies his potential anger, feeling guilty for staying in his home for a week without saying a word. Van suddenly bursts out, begging her not to say that she is going to leave him. Colette is utterly stunned by his desperate plea, her eyes wide with shock. Van erupts with intense emotion, threatening to keep her locked up right there if she ever tries to depart. The wind whips through the room as the intensity of Van's outburst leaves Colette breathless. Colette stands frozen, repeating the words, "locked up," in total disbelief. Van maintains a firm, possessive grip on her arm, refusing to let go. Trembling, Colette tries to speak to him to de-escalate the sudden tension. Van ignores her attempt to explain, repeating his demand for her to stay. He pulls her into a sudden, forceful embrace, trapping her against his chest. His eyes are cold and determined as he stares down at her, showing no sign of relenting. Colette stammers his name, completely overwhelmed by his sudden change in demeanor. Observers note that while Colette is clearly confused, Van appears entirely focused and driven. Van shouts that he has absolutely no intention of giving her up. Colette realizes there has been a massive misunderstanding and knows she must clear it up immediately. She cries out his name, pleading for him to just stop and listen to what she actually has to say. Van remains stuck in his panic, convinced she is about to deliver news of her departure. To calm him down, Colette shouts that she isn't going anywhere and promises not to leave if he will just listen. Van's grip slowly loosens as her words finally begin to sink in. Colette sighs in relief, desperately hoping that his threat about locking her up was just a joke. The tension lingers in the air as Van speaks her name softly. He reiterates that she can stay in his home for as long as she possibly wants. Colette looks up at him with shimmering eyes, moved by the depth of his devotion. She clutches her chest, her heart racing from the emotional whirlwind of the confrontation. Standing alone in the center of the room, Colette reflects on how much he has done for her while she has given nothing back. Colette expresses a desperate desire to repay Van for his help, but he gently insists that such a debt is unnecessary. With tears in her eyes, Colette confesses that her only true wish is to be useful to Van. Van softly calls out Colette's name, pausing the emotional momentum of her plea. Van reveals he has been waiting for the right moment to share something important that has been on his mind for a while. Colette stands before Van and firmly declares that she is no longer a noble's daughter. Van listens intently as Colette addresses him directly, her resolve clear in her expression. To Colette's shock, Van casually mentions that he already knows she is not actually a count's daughter. Van admits that he took the initiative to have Euro and his associates investigate her background. He explains his need to know the full truth of how she was treated so he could completely crush those who harmed her. Colette is left reeling, questioning Van's true identity and the extent of his investigation into her past. Van offers a sincere apology for prying into her life without permission and asks if she is angry with him. Colette quickly assures him that she isn't angry, though she remains visibly shaken by the revelation. Despite her lack of anger, Colette insists she cannot stay with him without a valid reason or purpose. Van counters her doubt by stating that simply being near him is more than enough and that she requires no justification to stay. Colette gazes at him in silence, stunned by his unconditional acceptance of her presence. Van offers a warm, gentle smile that reinforces his kind words. He calls her name again, his tone full of affection and reassurance. Van asks if staying with him makes her uncomfortable, but Colette radiantly replies that she has never been happier. Reflecting on their shared meals, Colette realizes that being with Van has filled her life with a joy and warmth she never knew existed. She admits to herself that this newfound happiness is exactly why she has been so afraid. Haunted by memories of her past, Colette recalls feeling that she only had value if she was helpful or perfect. Overcoming her fear of losing this happiness, Colette voices her own desire to remain by Van's side. Van suddenly grows intense, leaning in as he prepares to make a definitive proposal. Colette promises to work as hard as possible for him if only she is allowed to stay. The atmosphere shifts into a heavy silence as Van locks eyes with her. Van takes her hand firmly, sending a jolt of realization through Colette's heart. Van worries that his feelings haven't been clear enough over the past 2 weeks and wonders if he failed to get his point across. With a serious expression, Van asks Colette if she would be willing to do something specific for him. Colette immediately pledges to do anything within her power to help him. Van suddenly drops to one knee, catching Colette completely off guard. In a stunning turn of events, Van looks up at Colette and asks her to marry him. He asks her to stay by his side forever, sharing smiles and a life together. Colette stands frozen, her face flushed as the weight of his proposal sinks in. Her mind races in a panic, wondering why such a life-changing request came so suddenly out of nowhere. Van realizes he needs to show her exactly how much he cares to erase her lingering doubts. Colette can only let out a confused gasp as the situation escalates beyond her expectations. The scene shifts to the quiet intimacy of a private room. Van pulls Colette into a protective embrace from behind, holding her close as they sit together. Colette finds herself unable to move, her heart racing as she feels the warmth of Van's body against hers. Van decides he wants total privacy with Colette and instructs Mimi to cancel all plans for the next 2 days. Mimi obediently accepts the command, leaving the two alone. Van tells Colette that if she has nowhere else to go, she is welcome to stay with him for as long as she desires. He emphasizes his commitment to her, reiterating that he would do absolutely anything for her. Acknowledging her past trauma, Van promises to spoil her and give her all the time she needs to heal. Colette is overwhelmed, barely able to process the idea of Van wanting to spoil her. Van asks her to focus her thoughts entirely on him from this moment forward. Blushing furiously, Colette stammers that saying such things makes her believe he actually likes her. Van sighs in disbelief that she still hasn't realized the depth of his feelings by now. With absolute clarity, Van finally speaks the words she needs to hear, "I love you." He reflects on his own growth and declares that now that he has everything he needs, he can finally confess his love. Van wonders if his feelings have finally reached her, while Colette is left in awe of the truth. Softening his gaze, Van asks Colette if she is willing to tell him what happened during the time they were apart. Colette begins to open up, explaining that leaving House Mangarecapped was a difficult but necessary decision she made for herself. Flashes of her past reveal the pain and isolation she endured while living with her former family. Overwhelmed by the memory and the present kindness, Colette tearfully apologizes to Van. Van pulls her closer and asks one final question to understand her heart. Colette prepares herself to answer, nodding her consent to his inquiry. Van asks if she ever harbors a secret wish to return to the house she left behind. Colette's response is immediate and absolute, vowing never to return to that place again. Van thanks her for her honesty, his heart finally at ease knowing she is truly his. Colette asks her companion for an answer to her previous question, seeking clarity in their ongoing conversation. Blushing deeply, Colette wonders if she is truly the one he wants. Sitting on his lap, Colette softly admits she is willing to be with him if he truly accepts someone like her. Startled by her sudden honesty, he looks at her with wide eyes and asks if she is truly serious. Colette explains she isn't ready for marriage yet, but he gratefully promises to wait for as long as she needs. He suggests they spend the entirety of the following day together to celebrate their bond. Colette looks up in surprise, processed by his sudden and direct invitation. He gently tells her it is time to forget the pain of the past and begin building happy new memories. When he offers to take her out, Colette playfully doubts if clothes that suit her even exist. He reaffirms her confidence, declaring that she is absolutely beautiful and clothes for her definitely exist. He thinks to himself that he would become anything just to be there for Colette. Lillian reflects on her past suffering and wonders why she was the only one destined to be so frail. The nights were unbearable as she suffered through constant fevers and a never-ending cough. In her youth, simply having her older sister by her side was enough to make her happy. However, the dynamic shifted as the weight of her unfair circumstances began to take hold. The internal resentment grew as she realized how much her illness limited her life. Lillian's parents and sister watch over her bed, their faces etched with concern for her health. Lillian remains silent as her family hovers over her, the weight of her condition hanging heavy in the room. Her father apologizes through gritted teeth, feeling guilty that he couldn't give her a healthy body. In a moment of vulnerability, Lillian finally lets her true feelings slip out. She openly admits to her parents that she envies her older sister's strength. That accidental confession changed everything, as their parents began treating the older sister much more harshly. Lillian watches the fallout with a somber expression, realizing the power her words now hold. Her parents comfort her, promising Lillian they will always be there to support her no matter what. From that point forward, every wish Lillian made as the pitiful daughter was granted. Lillian observes her parents from behind a door, seeing how they now revolve entirely around her needs. Lillian notices her older sister watching her, sensing the shift in their family's attention. She peers through the gap in the door, certain that her sister must be drowning in jealousy. Lillian relishes the fact that she has finally gained the upper hand over her older sibling. Her beauty and frailty became lethal weapons, elevating her status above her sister. Lillian justifies her actions by telling herself that her older sister already had everything to begin with. The feeling of finally being the favored one is an exhilarating rush for the sickly girl. Her parents and the household staff all begin to center their lives around her. The maids, the steward, and even the gardeners fall under the spell of her perceived helplessness. Every single person in the estate took the side of the poor, sickly Lillian. She found that the more she took from her sister and made her suffer, the stronger she felt. The cruelty fueled her, giving her a sense of power she never possessed before. Lillian laughs to herself, feeling better every time she manages to make her sister fall. As she grew, Lillian realized her illness was fading, causing her to panic and cling to her weakness. Bursting into the room, Lillian excitedly tells her parents there is someone she wants to introduce. She is outraged at the thought of her older sister finding happiness all for herself. Her father strikes the older sister, screaming at her to think about how Lillian feels. Lillian feels vindicated, knowing her parents would naturally take her side in any conflict. She smugly thinks to herself that her sister deserves to be locked away from the world. Everything changes when Lillian turns 16 and her older sister is suddenly assigned a fiancé. Lillian is immediately struck by how handsome the new man is, her envy flaring up once more. Rage consumes her as she questions why good fortune always seems to find her sister. Her parents explain she cannot marry or bear children due to her fragile body, claiming it's for her protection. Lillian refuses to accept this fate, declaring that the entire mangarecapped estate belongs to her. She realizes she will have to take matters into her own hands to get what she wants. Even when Lillian tried to steal Dian-sama for herself, her sister barely reacted to the provocation. Lillian decides the only way to win is to humiliate her sister in front of everyone. She believes it is obvious to everyone that she is the one who is truly loved. Despite her confidence, Lillian admits she knew very little about how high society actually functioned. The crowd at the social gathering gasps in awe at the beauty on display. Lillian makes her grand entrance, laughing and asking what everyone is talking about. Lillian introduces herself to the group, inviting them all to have tea with her sometime. The noble women whisper behind their fans, completely confused about who this newcomer even is. Lillian smiles to herself, convinced the others are only staring because they are jealous of her. She approaches another guest, complimenting her dress and eagerly asking for her name. Lillian rushes ahead in excitement as her sister, Colette, tries in vain to restrain her. Envisioning a grand future, Lillian believes that even the kingdom's prince will fall for her charms. Lillian revels in the attention of the crowd, convinced she should have arrived at the social scene much sooner. Colette finally reaches her breaking point, shouting at Lillian to stop her disruptive behavior. The atmosphere turns cold as Colette offers a sincere apology to an onlooker while Lillian reacts with confused indignation. An angry Lillian demands to know what the problem is, but Colette sternly orders her to cease her outburst. Inside a carriage, Colette demands to know if Lillian realizes the weight of her actions as they are forced to return home early. Lillian lashes out in fury, claiming the situation makes no sense and that Colette should be angry at herself instead. Exhausted and defeated, Colette sighs and gives up, realizing there is no longer any point in trying to reason with her sister. Lillian bitterly accuses Colette of being unable to forgive her simply for taking Dion-sama away. The moon hangs high over the silent mansion, marking the end of the disastrous night. Back at home, Lillian weeps hysterically, claiming that her elder sister humiliated and even struck her at the party. The parents react with shock and disbelief, questioning how Colette could possibly treat her sister so cruelly. A flashback reveals a harsh physical confrontation between the two sisters in the doorway. Standing with her arms crossed, Lillian coldly declares that this is the consequence for anyone who dares to get in her way. 1 week passes in the aftermath of the falling out. Lillian wanders the halls with a cheerful smile, wondering if her elder sister has finally learned her lesson. Pausing at a door, Lillian is confused to overhear a worried conversation involving Professor Anne. The gossip spreads that Lillian acted like a spoiled child during the recent party. Concerns are raised regarding Lillian's health in light of the ongoing family drama. Professor Anne suggests that it might be best if Lillian stops attending social gatherings and tea parties altogether. The professor advises the parents to reconsider how they handle Lillian, noting that Colette spent the entire party covering for her. Lillian stands frozen behind the door, trembling as she listens to the harsh truth of how she is perceived. Stung by the criticism, Lillian wonders why everyone is suddenly being so mean to her. She flees in tears, blaming Colette for making her minor mistakes seem far worse than they actually were. In her twisted logic, Lillian decides that Colette is at fault because she simply wanted to be like her sister. Lillian confesses her deep envy of Colette's fiancé, Dion-sama, and the constant attention their parents gave her. She laments that she only wanted to make her parents proud by inheriting the house and marrying Dion-sama herself. The parents are shown weeping with joy, though it is unclear which daughter they are praising in this moment of reflection. Rumors circulate that Colette has been punished severely, even being refused meals for days. Lillian acknowledges that she successfully stripped Colette of her title and her fiancé. Despite her victory, Lillian remains obsessed, unable to stand the thought of Colette finding happiness elsewhere. A dark, predatory smile crosses Lillian's face as she decides Colette must always stay right by her side. The narrative shifts as a voice rejects a previous life, wanting nothing more to do with the past. A frantic plea to stop is ignored as the memory of Colette fades away. A final, haunting goodbye marks the definitive break from the mangarecapped family. The narrator reflects on their simple desires and the pain of never being understood. They admit they just wanted someone to take pity on them for once, rather than always favoring Colette. The family is left in shock, wondering if Colette has completely lost her mind by leaving. Sunlight streams through an open window into an empty room. A silent, somber moment passes as the weight of the departure settles in. Enraged, the father brands Colette an ungrateful brat and vows to have her disowned immediately. Dion-sama dismissively sighs, confident that Colette will eventually come crawling back to them. The family remains arrogant, certain that she has no other choice but to return. They mock her chances of survival, believing there is no way she could live out there alone. Contrary to their expectations, the narrator reveals that no matter how long they waited, Colette never came back. Chapter begins with Colette, now nearly a month removed from her life at the mangarecapped mansion. She notes with relief that she didn't end up in a gutter or a brothel as she had once feared. Colette finds herself feeling far more at peace than she ever did in her former home. Living with Van, she experiences a level of comfort and kindness she feels she hardly deserves. Grateful for her new life, she wishes there was something she could do to repay Van for his generosity. However, every time Colette tries to help with chores like the dishes, Van humorously scolds her and stops her. Colette ponders the one specific condition Van set when he invited her to live in his mansion. The condition is absolute. Colette is strictly forbidden from leaving the mansion grounds. Whenever she asks why, Van simply tells her he doesn't want her to be frightened. Colette suspects there must be a deeper reason for her confinement, but she remains uncertain. As a guest, she feels it is not her place to pry into Van's private affairs or secrets. Colette approaches a servant, asking if she might be allowed to request something. She expresses a bright-eyed desire to learn the language of the Shimei Empire. The servant agrees to inform Lord Van of her request right away. Shortly after, Van arrives in person to fulfill Colette's request. Accompanied by several attendants, Van introduces a specialized tutor brought in all the way from the Shimei Empire. Displaying various scrolls and coins, he explains that Colette will now be able to study history, formal language, and economics. With a charming smile, Van reveals he has gone even further by arranging tutors for a wide variety of subjects. Overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness and generosity, Colette expresses her immense happiness. Seeing her joy makes the effort worthwhile, and Van warmly admits he is glad she likes the arrangement. Colette dives headfirst into her studies, becoming completely immersed in the complex language and rich culture of the Shimei Empire. As she focuses on her new life, her previous longing and curiosity regarding the outside world naturally begin to fade away. To master the tongue, she even requests that Mimi and Euro speak to her exclusively in the Shimei language. In her downtime, Colette peacefully reads or practices embroidery while eagerly waiting for Van to return home. The moment he enters the estate, she is there to meet him with a bright smile and a warm welcome. Van returns her affection, letting her know he has returned home safely to her. Their evenings settle into a comfortable daily routine of greeting one another and sharing a warm meal while discussing their day. Under a crescent moon, the day concludes with Van tenderly wishing Colette a good night. Colette echoes the sentiment, feeling a deep sense of contentment as they retreat to their own spaces. Despite the separation of their individual rooms, Colette can't help but feel a shift in their dynamic. She reflects on how their domestic life makes it feel as though they are already a married couple. Deep down, she begins to accept the reality that she is truly becoming Van's wife. Surrounded by attendants, she prepares for rest within the lavish and spacious estate. While being pampered, Colette wonders if it is truly okay for her to be treated with such extraordinary care. Euro reassures her, noting that such treatment is only natural since she will soon officially be Lord Van's wife. The attendants offer further praise, telling Lady Colette just how lovely she looks. Colette is momentarily stunned into silence by the gravity of their words and her rising status. Sitting closely on a sofa, reading together has now become a standard and cherished part of her daily life with Van. Van interrupts her thoughts by softly calling her name, prompting her to look up in curiosity. While holding her close, Van asks if she would like to accompany him on an outing the following day. The suggestion catches Colette off guard, as she clarifies with surprise if he truly means going outside. Van notes that she has been indoors for an entire month and suggests that a change of pace would be good for her. Colette agrees, and soon they find themselves traveling in an elegant horse-drawn carriage. Dressed in a beautiful, intricate gown, Colette looks out from the carriage with a sense of trepidation. She notices Mimi and Euro acting more like authoritative guards than ordinary servants, fueling her inner suspicions. Colette admits to herself that she has had a vague feeling for a while that Van isn't a typical noble. She wonders if the oddities are just cultural differences or if there is something much deeper hidden behind Mimi and Euro's behavior. The carriage continues its journey as the weight of these unanswered questions hangs in the air. Suddenly, Colette realizes their location and gazes out the window in total shock. To her utter bewilderment, she recognizes the scenery as the Everilot Kingdom. The realization hits her hard. Despite everything she was told, she was never in the Shimei Empire at all. Van begins to explain, revealing he purchased the estate from someone who had once saved his life. Colette pieces it together, asking if his mysterious benefactor was actually a noble of the Everilot Kingdom. Van closes his eyes and calmly confirms that her suspicion is correct. Sensing her unease, he offers to stop the outing if the revelation makes her uncomfortable. However, Van admits he has always felt the need to tell her the truth because it has been weighing on his mind. Colette stares at him, wondering exactly what else Van has been keeping secret from her. Though she feels unready, she decides that if she is to marry him, she must know his true identity. She reminds herself that he saved her from the depths of hell and that she wants to truly support him. Van continues his story, explaining how his savior brought him to the Shimei Empire, his mother's birthplace. Colette is surprised to learn of his mother's heritage, finally connecting his ties to the distant empire. Van confirms her heritage, setting the stage for the ultimate revelation. Gathering her courage, Colette asks the question that has haunted her: who is he really? Van reveals that his mother was actually the 8th daughter of the Shimei imperial family. He explains that she was sent away to serve as a consort to the king of Everilot. Colette begins to panic as the pieces fall into place, desperately wishing the truth wasn't what she feared. Van confirms her fears, preparing to drop the mask and reveal his true name at last. With a solemn expression against the backdrop of the castle, he declares his real name is Sylvain Louverila. Colette repeats the name in a daze, the weight of the royal title crashing down upon her. To her absolute horror, she realizes she is standing before the legendary vanished first prince. Van looks down with a pained expression, apologizing for keeping his true identity hidden for so long. Looking back, Colette realizes she only saw him at official functions where his modest attire never hinted at royalty. She admits she judged him solely by his appearance and never once imagined he was the first prince. Flustered, she asks if she should address him as Prince Sylvain now, but he remains her beloved Van. Sylvain admits he has come to like the name Van because it was given to him by Colette. Stunned by this revelation, Colette looks at him with wide-eyed confusion and utter disbelief. Sylvain explains that Colette misheard his name when they first met because he muttered it too softly. He confesses that he chose not to correct her because he genuinely liked the sound of her calling him Van. Sylvain asks her to continue using the name, as it is the only time he has truly felt happy. Colette remains silent, processing the weight of his request while gazing at him with a soft expression. He reveals his royal status is gone, as he is officially considered dead and no longer belongs to the family. Sylvain explains that Marquis Zeldo was actually the man who saved his life. Looking out at the scenery, he mentions that the mansion they currently reside in once belonged to the Marquis. Years ago, Marquis Zeldo served as the king's most trusted advisor until he vanished with his wealth. Rumors of a curse haunted the Marquis' estate, ensuring that no one dared to purchase the property. Eventually, the land was divided and a portion of it ended up under the control of House Mangarecapped. Sylvain recalls how he and his mother were discarded by the crown once the second prince, William, was born. Following his mother's death, Sylvain's existence was simply erased and he was officially written off as deceased. A loyal maid suddenly bursts into Sylvain's room, signaling the start of their desperate escape. Fearing for his life, the maid urges Lord Sylvain to flee the castle immediately to avoid certain death. Their ultimate destination is the distant Shimei Empire, far from the reach of his treacherous family. Sylvain recounts how his mother's maid fled the castle with him, only to be pursued by the crown's forces. Soldiers hunt them down in the darkness, shouting that the maid is a kidnapper who must be stopped. In a brutal flash of violence, the maid is cut down while Sylvain watches in absolute horror. Amidst the tragedy, the Marquis appears and comforts the young boy, telling him he is finally safe. Sylvain realizes he is the last survivor of his lineage, standing alone in the aftermath of the slaughter. Overwhelmed by grief and trauma, the boy wishes he had been killed alongside his protector. It is revealed that the king himself ordered Marquis Zeldo to assassinate the young Sylvain. Colette's face contorts with shock as she learns the dark truth behind Sylvain's supposed saviors. Sylvain describes falling into total despair, simply waiting for the Marquis to end his life as ordered. Instead of killing him, the Marquis abandoned everything to take Sylvain abroad and raise him with love. He exposes the queen's cruelty, revealing she used a slow, painful poison to murder his mother. Colette is moved to tears by the horrific details of Sylvain's past and the loss of his mother. Meanwhile, Prince William Louverila becomes the subject of dark rumors regarding the kingdom's future. The queen dotes on Prince William excessively, further solidifying the corruption within the royal court. Fear for the kingdom grows as the power of the queen and her favored son remains unchecked. Sylvain swore vengeance against the queen and everyone else who cast him aside and destroyed his life. He climbed the ranks of the Shimei Empire, eventually gaining the emperor's favor and immense power. Now, Sylvain's goals are perfectly aligned with the emperor's as they move toward their final objective. Colette asks about the nature of these goals, sensing the gravity of the plan he has set in motion. Sylvain confirms that his preparations for the coming conflict are nearly complete. Before his death, Marquis Zeldo admitted to Sylvain that he had lived only for the sake of vengeance. The Marquis's final dying wish was for Sylvain to go and see Colette just one more time. Colette is stunned to realize that the Marquis had intended for them to reunite. Sylvain confesses that even upon returning to Everilot, revenge was the only thing on his mind. He marvels at how being with Colette makes his burning desire for revenge slowly fade away. With a gentle smile, Sylvain thanks Colette for being the light that changed his heart. Colette reflects on Sylvain's long suffering, feeling guilty for only ever focusing on her own problems. She tries to apologize, but Sylvain tells her he has never been happier than when he is with her. He reaches out and tenderly cups her face, showing her the affection he has held back for so long. Sylvain warns her that he is no longer the person she once knew in their childhood. He repeats the chilling sentiment that he is no longer the man Colette once knew. Sylvain admits he may not deserve to stay by her side, yet he cannot help wanting to hold her close. Colette insists that she is the one who should apologize for her past ignorance. She regrets not listening to his story sooner, wondering if things could have been different. Sylvain looks on silently as Colette pours out her heart, her emotions raw and exposed. Caught up in her own shame, Colette struggles to find the right words to comfort him. Sylvain recalls that her love back then gave even someone like him the will to live. He reaches for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a silent promise of support. Colette looks up at him, her expression a mix of surprise and deepening affection. Sylvain declares that meeting Colette was truly the best thing that ever happened to him. Their hands remain locked together, a physical manifestation of the bond they have rebuilt. In a sudden moment of vulnerability, Colette leans forward and buries her face against his chest. Sylvain pulls her into a protective embrace, finally finding peace in the arms of the one he loves. Van pulls Colette into a desperate embrace, confessing that the mere thought of losing her is the one thing that terrifies him most. Trembling with vulnerability, Van admits he never realized how weak he truly was until faced with the prospect of their separation. A close-up reveals Colette's wide, shimmering eye as she reflects in silence on the depth of Van's hidden pain. Memories of the past flood back, showing a young Van whose eyes always looked as though parting ways was killing him inside. Determined to change their future, Colette vows that from this moment on, she always wants to stay by his side. She reflects on how her feelings for Van haven't changed one bit since the very beginning of their journey together. A shadow falls over Colette's face as a painful realization strikes her regarding her current standing. She gazes at the noble Van, who has successfully built a high status for himself within the Shaimai Empire. Feeling unworthy as a disowned daughter of a noble, she wonders how she could possibly stand beside someone of his rank. Steeling her resolve, Colette decides she must become stronger to be worthy of staying by his side. Her heart aches with the desire to ease Van's suffering, even if only by a small margin. She prays for his happiness, wishing to make up for everything he has endured throughout his life. Tears stream down Colette's face as she asks to stay with him, promising to never leave his side if he will have her. Van looks on in shock, gently asking Colette why she is crying as he searches her tear-filled eyes. With a radiant yet tearful smile, Colette confesses that her tears are purely out of love and empathy for him. Sitting together in the carriage, she declares that she will stay right there as long as he wants her. Van offers a tender smile and confesses his love for Colette, admitting he has felt this way since the day they met. Overwhelmed with emotion, Colette leans in and softly reciprocates his confession of love. The two share a passionate kiss inside the carriage, finally confirming their mutual devotion to one another. They pull back slightly, breathless and flushed, as the romantic tension between them reaches its peak. Van smirks playfully, admitting he's in trouble now because his feelings for her have become so intense. He leans in close, whispering that he doesn't think he will ever be able to let her go again. Colette giggles softly, telling him she is glad to hear he feels that way. Suddenly, Van's expression shifts to one of pure shock as he realizes the magnitude of their situation. He bursts out of the carriage seat in a panic, shouting, "What?" as Colette tries to steady him. Scrambling at the window, Van shouts for his subordinates Mimi and Euro to prepare horses so he can pay his respects to the king immediately. Colette tries to quiet him down in embarrassment, but Van loudly regrets that they cannot be married at this very moment. Radiant with joy, Van laughs that he is too happy to care, while Colette warns him to sit down before he falls. The carriage continues its journey through the streets, its wheels creaking as it moves toward the destination. Van composes himself and notes that they have finally arrived at the royal capital. Colette looks out the window, repeating, "The royal capital?" with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Van extends his hand to her, warmly inviting her to step out and begin their new life together. The grand architecture of the capital's buildings looms large against a sky filled with drifting clouds. Elsewhere, Colette's father sits in shadow, having officially disowned her exactly 1 week after she left home. Colette's sister, Liliane, scoffs that it serves Colette right for not listening to her. Liliane stands alone in a room, surrounded by luxury but radiating a cold, selfish satisfaction. A flashback reveals Colette defiantly cutting her own hair with scissors despite the protests of those around her. The memory fades, leaving a lingering sense of the dramatic rift that has formed within the family. Liliane thinks to herself that Colette should have been clever like her and learned how to play along. Proudly, Liliane counts her spoils. Her parents' love, the family estate, and a handsome fiancé are all hers now. She callously notes that the only unfortunate thing is losing her favorite way to relieve stress, tormenting her sister. Liliane reflects on her past arrogance, noting that was simply what she thought back then. The reality of her isolation sets in as she realizes that after Colette left, her parents stopped visiting her as well. Desperate for attention, Liliane pleads at her father's door, asking if he will finally see her. Her father coldly dismisses her, claiming he is too busy and telling her to go away. She realizes that all the work and expectations previously placed on Colette have now fallen squarely on her. Bored and neglected, she laments that neither her father nor her mother is paying her any attention anymore. To her horror, even her fiancé Dion stopped showing his face the moment they became officially engaged. Frustrated, she complains that there has been no reply to the letter she sent him 3 days ago begging for a visit. Liliane screams in a rage, unable to understand why he doesn't love her as he is supposed to. Her mother checks her for a fever and, finding none, insists that she must continue to meet the growing family demands. A massive stack of books is slammed onto the table, representing the heavy burden of her new education. Liliane looks at the daunting pile of work in complete shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her tutor sternly lists the day's tasks: foreign languages, social etiquette, and dance lessons. Liliane protests loudly, claiming she isn't feeling well and refuses to study today. The tutor remains unmoved, stating that since there is no fever, the lessons must proceed. Slamming her hands down, Liliane yells that they have to be kidding her with these expectations. She fumes that she never had to go through this before and insists this is not her role. As the tutor demands she start from the top, Liliane despairs over why she has to suffer like this. Her final scream of "I can't do it anymore" echoes through the estate, marking her complete breakdown. Liliane erupts into desperate tears, clutching her chest and insisting she is too ill to move. Her father remains unmoved, coldly informing her that the physician has already declared her perfectly healthy. He reminds her sternly of their status at the mangarecapped estate, demanding she uphold her family obligations. Distraught, Liliane cries out that her parents are acting strangely and pushing her harder than ever before. Doubling over in agony, she begs to be allowed to rest, unable to understand their lack of sympathy. Her father's voice remains harsh as he explains that her attendance at the upcoming ball is non-negotiable. Liliane collapses into her hands, sobbing as the weight of her family's expectations crushes her spirit. She tells herself that if she simply collapses from exhaustion, she will finally be granted the rest she craves. In a final desperate plea, she screams at them, asking if they truly cannot see her suffering. Her mother looms over her, shouting her name and declaring that she is the only hope left for their house. Liliane looks up with wide, tear-filled eyes, stunned by the sheer intensity of her mother's desperation. Her father barks an order for her to return to her lessons, noting that she has already missed far too many. Gripped by a sense of profound injustice, Liliane realizes that something is deeply wrong with her current life. Staring out at the mangarecapped mansion, she laments that her reality has deviated so far from what it was supposed to be. As the day of the ball finally arrives, she sighs in relief, hoping the event will provide a temporary breather. A grand carriage sits waiting beneath the trees to transport the nobility to the social event of the season. Inside the carriage, Liliane snaps at her fiancé, Dion, demanding to know why he is ignoring her. Dion sits in heavy silence, refusing to acknowledge her presence despite her repeated attempts to engage him. He let out a long, weary sigh, internally labeling Liliane as an incredibly tiresome and annoying woman. Liliane flinches in shock as the atmosphere suddenly shifts, sensing a dark change in Dion's demeanor. Dion muses privately that while her sister Colette was sharp and suspicious, Liliane is far easier to handle. Leaning in with a sinister smirk, Dion bluntly tells Liliane to her face that she is utterly useless. Horrified and gasping for breath, Liliane reels back from the sudden and cruel verbal assault. Dion scoffs at her threat to tell her parents, mocking her weakness with a chilling display of arrogance. He gloats that throwing her sister Colette out to choose her instead was the best decision he ever made. Dion bursts into a mocking laugh, calling her a fool for making his deception so incredibly easy. He explains that he only played nice because Colette was the only one who ever truly doubted his intentions. Dion exults in his perceived victory, declaring with a triumphant grin that he is finally free. He towers over her, sneering that this humiliation is the direct result of all her constant whining and lies. Liliane is paralyzed with fear, wondering how Dion could possibly know the truth about her faked illnesses. Dion warns her that if she refuses to play along with his schemes, her own parents will discard her. He lets out a sharp, derisive snort at her expense, finding her complete lack of power amusing. Dion cackles loudly, telling Liliane that she is far too pathetic to even find the words to describe. He finds it hilarious that both Colette and her parents fell so easily for her childish act. Liliane trembles with rage and humiliation, her face contorting as she realizes the extent of her predicament. Dion continues to mock her, stating that her childish and stupid nature makes her a laughingstock. He challenges her to consider which one of them would truly suffer more if the truth of their situation came out. Dion points out that if the engagement is broken, she is the one who will lose everything. He paints a grim picture of her being labeled as the girl who stole her sister's fiancé and failed to keep him. Stunned, Liliane watches as he predicts the total ruin and crumbling of House Myriac's reputation. Dion asks if she has any idea what the common people truly say about her and her noble house. He lists the insults used against her, calling her the Count's burden and an outrageous, selfish lady. Liliane is shell-shocked, weakly suggesting that those insults must surely be directed at her sister Colette. Dion shuts her down immediately, clarifying with brutal honesty that every insult is directed solely at her. She stares at him in utter disbelief, her worldview shattering as the truth of her social standing sinks in. He warns that she will be known as the worst lady, who faked illness to destroy her own sister. Liliane stammers in denial, finding the idea of being the worst lady to be completely absurd. She desperately claims that her father will fix everything once she talks to him and explains the situation. Dion reminds her of the power dynamic, noting that he is from a ducal house while she is merely from a count's. Liliane's eyes widen in a moment of horrific clarity as she realizes she is being framed as the villain. As they approach the venue, Dion regains his composure, his face settling back into a mask of noble calm. He tells her she shouldn't even be attending parties anymore given her supposed fragile health. Dion mockingly suggests she should just go back to using her favorite fake illness excuse. A close-up of Liliane's eye reveals the sheer intensity of the shock and betrayal she is currently feeling. He delivers a final cold command, telling her not to come anywhere near him during the event. Liliane huddles in the carriage, weeping and asking why he is being so cruel to her. Dion reaffirms his disdain, stating he wants no one to believe she is actually his fiancée after her blunders. Liliane seethes with resentment, unable to believe how much the man she thought was kind has changed. She steps out of the carriage into the light, mourning the loss of the fun she used to have at such events. Standing at the entrance of the ballroom, Liliane prepares to face a world that now views her as a monster. Liliane trembles under the weight of piercing gazes and scornful laughter as she feels herself being appraised by the judging eyes of high society. Paralyzed by anxiety, she desperately tries to recall the lessons she learned to survive this hostile environment. The faceless crowd whispers and snickers, their collective mockery creating an unbearable wall of sound. A cold sweat breaks out as the pressure of the social gathering threatens to overwhelm her resolve. Panic sets in as she contemplates feigning illness or finding any excuse to escape the crushing weight of the room. Desperate and cornered, she considers the cruel possibility of shifting the blame onto her sister to save herself. Her body shakes with fear at the thought of failing the formal greeting and becoming a permanent laughingstock. The realization hits her that she can no longer use Colette as a shield or a scapegoat for her own inadequacies. Clinging to her chest, she stands alone in the vast, intimidating hall, looking like a small bird caught in a storm. Unable to take another second of the scrutiny, Liliane turns and flees the party in a frantic blur of silk and lace. In the sanctuary of her home, she seethes with humiliation because things turned out exactly as the dreaded Dion predicted. Her parents explode in a fit of rage, demanding to know why she would commit the ultimate social sin of returning without a proper greeting. Her father bellows that he will drag her back to the party by force if necessary to salvage what remains of their reputation. Liliane screams in defiance, refusing to return to the den of wolves regardless of her parents' demands. The family room becomes a battlefield of shouting, with Liliane cornered by the people who should be protecting her. Her mother shrieks that her cowardice is a stain on the family, especially in the presence of the powerful Duke Fervor. Tears streaming down her face, Lillian shrieks that the Duke is a devil who is playing them all for fools. Her father loses all patience, grabbing her and declaring that he will no longer allow her to be a spoiled, disobedient child. Through her sobbing, Lillian wonders why her parents are blaming her when she believes the fault lies entirely with Colette. She convinces herself that her sister is the root of all her misery, fueling a deep-seated resentment. Outside in the bustling city, the sun shines over a world that remains indifferent to the drama unfolding within the manor. Colette stands in the street, noting the lively atmosphere while a mysterious, elegant man watches over her. The man reveals his plan to attend the Kingdom of Ivalarat's Founding Day Ball as the official representative of the Shaimai Empire. Shocked, the companion realizes that this man, Van, is attending the prestigious event in place of the Emperor himself. Van explains with a calm intensity that House Miriact will likely be there, and it is time for them to see Colette's true worth. Colette looks on in confusion, trying to process the magnitude of the situation Van is describing. Van asserts that everyone needs to understand that Colette is now far beyond their reach and influence. He reveals that his entire purpose for the day was to prepare her for this moment of absolute social dominance. They step into a high-end boutique where Colette is dazzled by a display of breathtaking, opulent gowns. Van dismisses the idea of a custom order due to time constraints, deciding that the exquisite ready-made dresses will suffice. The staff politely ushers Colette toward a private room to begin a transformation fit for an empress. The luxury of the dressing room provides a quiet backdrop for the fashion metamorphosis about to take place. Colette emerges in a stunning, multi-layered gown and shyly asks Van for his honest opinion on her appearance. Van gazes at her with genuine admiration, noting how perfectly the vibrant colors complement her natural beauty. Overwhelmed by the number of dresses Van is selecting, Colette tries to protest as he orders them all. He reaffirms that bright, vibrant colors are her true domain, contrasting the dull life she led before. Colette looks at him with soft eyes, feeling a sense of protection and care she has never known. She reflects on how she used to believe that such dazzling beauty was reserved only for her sister, Lillian. With every kind word from Van, the painful memories of her past are slowly being rewritten and replaced with hope. Back in the city, the peaceful moment is shattered when a familiar, shrill voice cuts through the air, demanding they stop. To their horror, they find a disheveled man holding a bag of money that was intended for Colette's new life. Colette freezes in fear, recognizing the two people she hoped she would never have to face again. Lillian spots them and gasps in shock, her eyes widening as she sees her sister's sudden transformation. Lillian sneers with venomous disbelief, unable to accept that the pathetic sister she discarded is standing before her. Laughing hysterically, Lillian mocks Colette, suggesting she must have become a prostitute to afford such finery. She continues her cruel tirade, calling the former count's daughter pathetic and relishing in her perceived downfall. Lillian turns to Van with a wicked grin, offering to tell him something fun about Colette's disgraceful past. She spitefully claims that Colette was hated by her family and dumped by her fiancé because she was worthless. The atmosphere turns deadly as Van's elite guards, Mimi and Euro, draw their blades and wait for the signal to strike. Lillian screams in terror as Mimi instantly pins her down with a cold, sharp blade at her throat. The former socialite chokes out a gasp of pure fear, realizing too late that she has insulted the wrong man's companion. With a chillingly calm demeanor, Van commands Mimi to release the trembling girl. Mimi steps back with clinical indifference, leaving Lillian collapsed and gasping for air on the pavement. Lillian clutches her neck in shock, her arrogance completely shattered by the brief brush with death. Horrified, the man accompanying Lillian asks if they are using the language of the savage Shaimai Empire. Lillian's companion panics, demanding they get rid of the savages immediately to save face. The crowd gathers to witness the spectacle as Colette stands at the center of a brewing international incident. Van gently reassures Colette that everything is under control, his presence acting as a shield against her past. With a mocking smile, Van addresses Lillian directly, confirming her identity with a sharp, dangerous edge. Lillian stares up in a daze, completely outmatched as Van suggests that perhaps he will forgive her if she crawls and apologizes. Van aggressively grabs a woman's chin, demanding to know if she is the one responsible for Colette's suffering. With a dark smile, Van declares he will never allow anyone to insult Colette in his presence. Colette watches in shock as Van continues to restrain the woman while calling out her name. Looking at his hands, Colette begs Van to stop because she doesn't want him to dirty his hands for her. The restrained woman screams in a panic, claiming Van can't treat her this way and swearing he will pay. Colette stands frozen, her expression filled with lingering trauma and uncertainty. Driven by spite, the woman vows that she won't let this slide and promises revenge next time. Van ignores the threats and gently asks Colette if they should depart. A man nearby reacts in total confusion, demanding to know what is happening as Colette quietly agrees to leave. Van coldly commands the man to take the woman and disappear for his own sake, declaring that he cherishes Colette with his life. The man tries to argue, asking how this will be explained to House Mangarecapped and insulting Colette's work once more. The man stands speechless, stunned by Van's overwhelming and protective aura. Van calls for his subordinates, Mimi and Euro, announcing that he is taking Colette back to the carriage. Mimi and Euro bow respectfully, confirming they will follow his wishes as the carriage waits. Once inside the safety of the carriage, Van checks on Colette to see if she is all right. Van contemplates a permanent solution, wondering if he should simply erase the two who troubled her so she never has to worry again. Colette grabs Van's arm and pleads with him not to do it, even though he wants them to pay for what they did to her. She assures him that just being with him is more than enough and he doesn't need to take such drastic measures. Van looks at her with a softened, affectionate gaze, moved by her gentle nature. He pulls her into a firm, protective embrace, finding peace in the quiet of the carriage. Van whispers that he will obey her wishes for now, surrendering to her request. Later at the estate, Colette talks with Mimi, apologizing for all the trouble that occurred that day. Mimi serves tea and tells Colette not to worry about it at all. Colette remains anxious, fearing that if those two report the incident to her parents or the Duke, it could cause trouble for Van. She stares into her tea, haunted by the possibility of negative consequences for her protector. Mimi looks at her with a mysterious expression and flatly states that such a thing will not happen. Despite the reassurance, Colette admits she is still deeply worried about the future. Mimi suggests informing Van, noting that eliminating those two would spare Colette any needless worry. Claiming that assassinations are her specialty, Mimi dashes off while Colette frantically tries to stop her. 2 weeks pass quietly since that day, marked by a bright full moon over the estate. Colette notes that Van has been incredibly busy and away from the estate for a significant amount of time. Waiting alone, Colette looks toward the horizon and hopes that Van is doing okay. Mimi eventually approaches Colette to announce that Lord Van has finally returned. Colette follows Mimi but grows confused, noticing they are not heading toward their usual dining room. Mimi confirms they are going elsewhere because Lord Van wants to show her something special. Colette pauses, her face lit with a mix of curiosity and wonder. Walking through a path of lanterns, she wonders what could possibly be waiting for her. She reaches a beautiful, glowing gazebo standing under a vast, starlit sky. Van stands waiting inside the gazebo, dressed in formal, elegant attire. He calls out to Colette the moment he sees her approaching. Van steps forward and takes her into his arms, greeting her with warmth. Overwhelmed by the beautiful atmosphere, Colette asks him what all of this is for. Van explains that he prepared this because he wanted them to have a truly special night. Colette repeats the word, special, in a daze, touched by his effort. Mimi bows and invites Colette to take a seat at the prepared table. Mimi informs Van that everything is ready for the night's proceedings. Van places a hand on a formal document, the gravity of the moment becoming clear. Colette looks at the paper with wide eyes, asking if it is truly what she thinks it is. Van reveals he traveled to the Shaimai Empire specifically to obtain the Emperor's personal approval. He looks at her and confirms that her intuition is correct. Van apologizes for leaving so abruptly without saying anything to her beforehand. Colette realizes that Van's name is already signed on the official marriage documents. He explains that once she signs, he will submit them to the Empire and they will officially become husband and wife. Colette stands in stunned silence, looking at the man who has changed her entire world. She reflects on her past life, which was a living hell before she found Van again. Now filled with a new purpose, she vows to support him with everything she has and prepares to sign. With a heart full of love, she tells him clearly that she wants to be his wife. She declares that from this moment on, she will no longer be known as Colette Mangarecapped. Colette commits herself to a new path, choosing to live her life as Van's true partner. Feeling a sense of liberation, she realizes she has finally cut all ties with her former house. Colette and her partner share a cheerful moment as they prepare to begin their meal together. With a bright and radiant smile, Colette happily agrees to start dinner. Reflecting on her happiness, Colette feels a deep sense of gratitude toward her partner as she realizes her dreams are finally coming true. Over dinner, she finds the strength to open up about herself again, moving past her dark history. The conversation shifts from the pain of the past to the bright and hopeful future they plan to share together. Every mention of their future makes her heart flutter, though she remains unaware of the hardships her sister is about to face. Chapter begins with a view of an elegant, traditional pavilion under a clear sky. An attendant approaches Colette to inform her that she has a visitor waiting for her today. Surprised by the news, Colette wonders who could possibly be coming to see her. The attendant politely asks Colette to follow her once she has finished her preparations. Colette ponders the visitor's identity, noting that Van's foster father, Marquis Zeldo, has already passed away. She let out a small gasp of confusion as she prepares to meet the mysterious guest. To her absolute shock, she finds Alexia and Elsa waiting to see her. Colette is moved to tears, unable to believe that her friends have actually found her. Her friends rush toward her in a wave of relief, thanking goodness that she is safe and sound. Overwhelmed with emotion, they express their immense joy at finally seeing her again. Colette realizes with warmth that her precious friends never stopped worrying about her, even while she was confined at the Mangarecapped estate. Alexia explains that after hearing House Mangarecapped had disowned her, she and Elsa immediately began a desperate search. They admit they were terrified that something terrible had happened to her during her disappearance. The two friends recount how they even went to question the Earl and Countess to find clues about her whereabouts. They recall the confusion of the encounter, where they were questioned about the nature of their relationship with Colette. The memory of the strange and tense confrontation leaves them momentarily puzzled. Colette offers a sincere apology for causing them so much worry after all the letters they had exchanged. She confesses that she burned all their correspondence to ensure they wouldn't be dragged into her family's mess. Alexia and Elsa look on in stunned silence as they realize the extent of the isolation Colette forced upon herself. Her friends insist that she should have relied on them more, promising they would have helped her at any time. Deeply touched, Colette explains she only kept her distance because she didn't want to trouble those who had already supported her so much. Alexia tells her not to say such things, feeling guilty that they weren't able to do more for her sooner. The conversation turns to the news that Liliane has officially become engaged to Dion. Her friends mention there is something specific and troubling they need to ask her regarding House Mangarecapped. They demand to know what is happening, noting that Liliane never appears in public while Dion spends his days carousing. Colette looks on with a serious and contemplative expression as she prepares to reveal the truth. Deciding to be fully transparent, she tells her friends every single detail of what transpired. She realizes she can finally speak about that traumatic period properly, whereas before, the mere thought would make her tremble. Looking back, she credits her newfound strength and ability to move forward entirely to Van. Alexia and Elsa are horrified, finding it unbelievable and awful that Colette's place was taken from her by force. Colette reassures them that it is all in the past now that she has left House Mangarecapped and found happiness with the man she loves. The friends share a quiet, supportive moment as the weight of the revelation settles between them. Her friends warmly declare that if Colette is happy, then they are truly happy for her as well. Colette offers a heartfelt thank you to both of them for their unwavering loyalty and kindness. The three of them enjoy a lovely tea together, finally free from the need to hide from Liliane or their former classmates. During their tea, the friends remark happily that it finally feels like the old Colette is back. Colette giggles softly, asking if they really think she has returned to her true self. The mood shifts as Alexia mentions a note she recently received from Prince William regarding a potential fiancé candidacy. She explains that Prince William is searching for a bride but has such a terrible reputation that no ladies like him. Alexia sighs in frustration, wishing the prince would give up because she has no desire to marry someone like him. Reports suggest that the prince and Dion are frequently up to no good in the city, enabled by the queen's constant spoiling. Colette listens intently, agreeing with Alexia's assessment of the prince's character. Alexia vows to resist the match to the very end, noting the prince pesters her whenever she shows interest in another lord. Colette points out the obvious connection, noting how remarkably close William and Dion seem to be. They discuss how the prince does whatever he wants because the queen continues to coddle and excuse his behavior. Alexia laments that there is no hope for him to grow up when the queen constantly covers for his every misdeed. Colette reflects on the two men, realizing that William and Dion are essentially two of a kind. She suspects that now that Dion is engaged, William is likely pushing even harder to secure an engagement with Alexia. Alexia warns that even if she were to marry into the royal family, the entire structure is guaranteed to collapse someday. She firmly believes there is no future for her if she ends up tied to a man like the prince. As the visit comes to an end, Colette prepares to see her friends off from the pavilion. Colette stands by Van, waving goodbye to her friends with a look of peace and contentment. Alexia and Elsa offer their final congratulations, wishing Colette nothing but a life of happiness. Colette gives a final, grateful thanks as she watches her precious friends depart. A carriage rumbles away as Colette looks back with a serene smile, beginning her journey toward a new life. Lost in thought, Colette realizes her next encounter with her past will likely be at the prestigious Founding Day Ball. The weight of the event settles in as she prepares to face her parents along with the treacherous Dion and Liliane. Colette finds strength in her bond with Van, deciding that those who mistreated her no longer hold any power over her heart. Gazing at the horizon, she notes that the sunset is identical to the one on the day she fled House Miriact. Van approaches with a gentle smile, asking Colette if she has enjoyed her time today. Colette beams at Van, expressing her sincere gratitude for him inviting her guests to the estate. Van laughs warmly, telling Colette that seeing her happy is all he truly desired. A mysterious woman in traditional attire silently approaches the couple from the shadows. Startled by the new presence, Colette curiously asks Van about the identity of the woman. Van introduces Mimi as his loyal bodyguard and maid, noting that Euro serves him in the same capacity. Van reflects on the startling carelessness of the nobles and royals within the kingdom of Ivalarat. He observes that their lack of caution makes their private information incredibly easy for him to obtain. Noticing the evening chill, Van protectively draws closer to Colette to ensure she does not catch a cold. Colette giggles at his overprotectiveness, teasing Van about how much he tends to worry over her. With intense devotion, Van confesses that he simply cannot help himself because she is all he ever thinks about. Van tenderly pats Colette's head, causing her to blush deeply at his public display of affection. Looking at a portrait of a younger Van, Colette marvels at how much he has changed since their quiet first meeting. She reflects with deep emotion that meeting Van was truly the best thing that ever happened to her. Colette wonders where she would be now if she hadn't encountered him at her lowest point. Van gazes at her with a soft expression, reciprocating her feelings and validating their shared bond. He declares that she has always been his source of hope, a sentiment that has never wavered. Colette looks up at him with wide, shimmering eyes, moved by the depth of his unwavering support. With a playful laugh, Colette finally voices her feelings and tells Van that she loves him. Van acknowledges her confession with a knowing, confident smile. He leans in and softly whispers back that he loves her too, sealing their mutual devotion. In a moment of resolve, Van vows to himself that he will protect Colette no matter what happens next. The couple shares a joyous embrace against the backdrop of the grand estate. Night falls over the traditional architecture, illuminated by a sharp crescent moon in the starry sky. Colette rests peacefully in her lavish bed while Van watches over her from the shadows. As she sleeps soundly, a dark aura begins to emanate from the guardian standing by her side. Van's internal monologue turns vicious as he vows never to forgive anyone who has ever dared to hurt Colette. Elsewhere, Liliane clutches her chest in agony, wondering what on earth is happening to her. The spoiled girl stands beside a shadowed Dion, her usual arrogance replaced by visible distress. Gossip spreads among the household staff about how Liliane has refused to leave her room for days. Liliane seethes with resentment on her sofa, grinding her teeth and muttering about the unfairness of her situation. She laments that everyone has begun to blame her for everything ever since Colette left the house. The maids treat her coldly, and a physician stands by to ensure she can no longer feign illnesses for attention. Liliane realizes with horror that the family now views her as a worthless rock rather than a cherished jewel. She arrogantly assumes that if Colette could handle the family's expectations, then she should be able to as well. Liliane reflects on how she once looked down on Colette, believing her sister didn't even measure up to her. The pressure causes her to snap, her face contorted with a childish rage that the servants find pathetic. She throws a tantrum in her room, screaming about how cruel it is that no one understands her suffering. The crescent moon hangs over the Miriact estate as the internal decay of the family continues. A heavy sigh echoes through the dining hall as the patriarch grapples with the family's decline. The father despairs over the future of House Miriact, unsure of how to handle Liliane's deteriorating state. The mother admits that the vassals are complaining and notes that none of this chaos happened when Colette was present. They conclude that Liliane is hopeless and that her public appearances are only destroying the family's reputation. The father notes that Dion has been acting strangely ever since he became engaged to the younger daughter. Eavesdropping behind the door, Liliane is struck with shock and fury at her parents' harsh words. She blames Dion's rotten nature for the family's problems rather than accepting her own role in the engagement. Liliane finds the humiliation unbearable, feeling that her current life is worse than when she was actually sick. She remains convinced of her own superiority despite the crumbling world around her. Liliane screams at her reflection, enraged that Colette is living happily while she is forced to suffer. She gasps for air, desperately clinging to the memory of when everything in the household used to go her way. In her delusion, she believes all this could have been avoided if Colette had simply stayed to support her. A sharp knock at the door interrupts her spiral as her father enters, demanding they speak immediately. He orders Liliane to go choose a dress with Dion, as she is expected to participate in the Founding Day Ball. Liliane stands in stunned silence, realizing she is being forced back into the public eye. Trembling, she looks at her parents and pathetically asks if they will at least come with her for support. Liliane's father dismissively informs her that she will be fine staying behind with Dion, ignoring her visible distress. Desperate to remain with her parents, Liliane pleads with them not to leave her alone. The prospect of being left with Dion fills Liliane with dread, as she fears his unrestrained and unbearable nature. Her father lets out a weary sigh, clearly losing patience with his daughter's emotional outburst. Coldly rebuking her, he commands Liliane to stop acting like a spoiled child. Liliane freezes in shock, her wide eyes reflecting the sting of her father's harsh rejection. Dion chuckles darkly, mocking Liliane's helplessness and calling her adorable in a condescending tone. Standing alone in the room, Liliane is left questioning why her family has treated her this way. Liliane reflects on her older sister Colette's departure, assuming she would eventually perish or be forced into a life of servitude. To her absolute disbelief, Liliane spots Colette walking through the streets looking radiant and well-dressed. Staring in silence, Liliane struggles to process the fact that her sister did not die after all. A mysterious, handsome man watches the scene unfold, while Liliane begins to concoct a new theory about her sister's survival. Liliane sneers as she concludes that Colette must have survived by becoming a lowly courtesan. Snickering to herself, she decides that Colette is still beneath her despite finding a wealthy client. She finds twisted amusement in the thought of the fallen daughter of a count selling herself to stay alive. Liliane looks down on Colette with pure vitriol, relishing what she perceives as her sister's ultimate disgrace. The thought of Colette selling her body brings Liliane a sense of refreshed superiority and cruel satisfaction. She mentally labels her sister as filthy and abandoned, taking pride in the fact that Colette was rejected by their family and fiancé. Suddenly, a sharp blade is leveled at Liliane's throat, cutting her internal monologue short. Terrified and confused, Liliane gasps as she realizes she is being physically threatened in the middle of the street. The handsome man from before leans in close, identifying her as Colette's sister with a chilling smile. Liliane's ego briefly flares as she wonders if this man actually prefers her over Colette. She foolishly imagines him to be a prince who has come to rescue her from her own miserable engagement. Her fantasy is shattered when the man, then, violently grabs her by the jaw, prompting a cry of alarm from Colette. Van looks at Liliane with utter disgust, declaring that his hands are now too filthy to touch Colette after coming into contact with her. He stands back with a cold, composed expression, leaving Liliane reeling from the sudden insult. Speechless and trembling, Liliane realizes the filthy comment was directed squarely at her. She seethes with rage, claiming she has never been so humiliated in her entire life. Refusing to let the insult slide, she demands to know how they dare treat her with such disrespect. The tension escalates as the two parties stand off in the street, with Liliane's anger reaching a breaking point. Liliane screams at them, her face contorted with a mix of fury and indignation. The confrontation draws a sharp divide between the two groups on the cobblestone path. Consumed by malice, Liliane shrieks at them for mocking her. She loudly proclaims her status as a daughter of House Mangarecapped, threatening that they won't get away with this. Dion joins in the threats, boasting of his own high status in House Fervor and promising to crush them all. Shouting in a blind rage, neither of them realizes the grave mistake they are making. Only later would they deeply regret revealing their prestigious family names in this specific place. Lillian's jealousy boils over at the sight of Colette shining brighter than her, a reality she refuses to allow. She recalls how she deliberately dragged Colette down and forced her into misery just to stay on top. Plunged back into the present, Lillian is haunted by the question of why her plan failed. She is tormented by the fact that Colette looks more beautiful now than she ever did at home. Lillian breaks down in tears, unable to accept that her sister might actually escape her shadow. Her face twists into a mask of pure hatred as she whispers that she will never allow Colette to be free. In a final, desperate vow, Lillian swears that she will never permit her sister to find happiness. Colette reflects on the happiness she has found since being with Van, though she is equally moved by the unexpected reunion with her dear friends Alexia and Elsa. Despite her current joy, she cannot shake the haunting memories of Lillian and Dion from that fateful day in the capital. Even when she sought reassurance from Van, his smile offered a comfort that couldn't entirely erase the unease lingering in her mind. Her thoughts drift back to a dark proposal where the suggestion was made to simply turn their enemies to ash through assassination. Mimi's sudden, enthusiastic offer to handle the specialty task of assassination leaves Colette panicked, desperately shouting for her not to give Van any more dangerous ideas. She had truly believed she would be fine as long as her path never crossed with those two again. Colette recalls with a pang of bitterness how they already seemed convinced she had fallen so far as to become a courtesan. She imagines them now, frantically combing through every brothel in Averylut in a desperate search to find her. With the founding day ball only a week away, she drinks her tea in solitude, praying that nothing happens to disrupt the peace until then. She worries about the immense power held by the House of Fervor within the Averylut kingdom. The terrifying possibility that Van might end up clashing with Duke Fervor for her sake weighs heavily on her heart. Colette sits in silence, her expression shadowed by the growing anxiety of the looming conflict. She remembers meeting the Duke before and how his cold, judgmental eyes seemed to see right through her. She wonders if the manipulative Lillian has already made contact with Duke Fervor to set her plans in motion. Colette knows that if Lillian does meet him, the Duke's sharp intuition will immediately see through her true nature. Steeling her resolve, she tells herself she must stop dwelling on them if she is to move forward. Ever since their run-in with Lillian and Dion, the security surrounding them has reached an oppressive level of tightness. Van interrupts her thoughts to ask a sudden, pointed question, "Colette, do you love this country?" When she hesitates, he presses her further, demanding an answer with an uncharacteristically serious intensity. Colette looks down, struggling to find the right words to express her complicated feelings. She realizes that what she truly treasures in this land are her friends, Alexia and Elsa, who represent the best of her past. She remembers the kindness of the common folk who were always there for her, even when the nobility turned their backs. Though she finds it difficult to voice her internal conflict, she knows her heart is tied to the people she cares about. Finally, she admits that while her feelings are complex, she loves the country and hopes its people and her friends can live happily. Van listens to her heartfelt confession with a quiet, "I see," as he continues to sip his tea. She explains that this country is the very place where they met, making it impossible for her to truly hate it. Van gazes at her with a soft, knowing smile that seems to acknowledge the depth of her sincerity. The sun shines over the traditional, ornate rooftops of the palace as the day of the ball finally arrives. Her attendants are struck by her beauty, exclaiming that she looks absolutely wonderful in her formal attire. Colette stands in her grand gown, a vision of elegance that leaves those around her breathless. A polite knock at the door interrupts the preparations, making her blush as she hears the compliments from the other side. Startled but composed, she gives her permission for the visitor to enter the room. The door slides open to reveal a glimpse of Van, dressed in his own exquisite finery for the evening. Van stands before her in his full regal splendor, his presence commanding yet gentle as he admires her transformation. In his past life, Van carried the royal blood of Averylut and was destined to ascend the throne as the first prince. However, he chose a different path, casting away his royal birthright and the name, Sylvain, to live as the man he is now. By joining the Shimei Empire, he abandoned his former identity to forge a future on his own terms. Watching him, Colette's chest aches with the realization of how difficult it must be for him to return to a ball in the very kingdom he left behind. She clutches her dress in a moment of silent empathy, feeling the weight of the sacrifices he has made. Van approaches her with a steady step, his movements graceful and intentional. He reaches out to gently touch her face, whispering that she looks breathtaking and absolutely gorgeous tonight. Blushing deeply at his sincere praise, she softly thanks him while trying to hide her fluttering heart. He jokes that he could stare at her forever, but warns that they will be late for the ball if they don't leave immediately. Extending his hand with a charming smile, he asks if she is ready to face the evening together. As they sit in the carriage, Colette remarks on the exceptionally heavy security, to which Van reveals he arranged for extra protection just in case. His expression darkens as he explains that he needs a proper justification if he is to finally dispose of their enemies. Colette is taken aback, questioning the chilling implications of what it means to dispose of them. Van remains unfazed, noting with a cold confidence that it doesn't matter whose side the Duke chooses, as he has already taken the bait. With a look of grim determination, he declares that this time, the long-standing conflict will finally come to an end. He tells Colette she has no reason to worry, even as his words hint at the decisive and potentially violent confrontation ahead. Van gently offers his help, but Colette reminds him that he always makes that promise. He insists that her heart is enough and expresses his sole desire to see her smile after everything she has endured. Sudden chaos erupts as a carriage is surrounded and guards shout for the passengers to be seized immediately. A guard confirms he understands the order while the carriage jolts under the pressure of the ambush. Van calmly instructs Colette to wait inside for just a moment before he steps out to handle the threat. Colette gasps in fear, clutching herself as the tension of the confrontation outside escalates. An associate reports to Van that the situation is settled and the immediate danger has been neutralized. Remaining composed, Van orders his men to bind all the attackers and promises to join them shortly. Colette frantically asks after Mimi and Euro, only to be reassured that everyone is safe and the threat is gone. Van prepares to leave the carriage to confirm a specific detail, telling Colette once more to stay put. Trembling, Colette asks Mimi if the violent incident occurred because of her presence. Mimi looks at her with a stern yet comforting gaze, telling her there is absolutely no need to worry. Noticing Colette's disheveled state, Mimi offers to fix her hair before they enter the social event. Van calls out to Mimi, who acknowledges him with a sharp and ready response. Colette remains silent and shaken, her face pale as she tries to process the narrow escape. As the carriage begins to move again, Van leaves the remaining duties to Mimi, who accepts the command. Van stares out with a cold intensity, thinking that tonight's ball will finally bring everything to a definitive end. The couple sits in a heavy silence as the castle looms ahead, both lost in their own dark premonitions. Colette repeats his words in a whisper, terrified by the implication of what might end tonight. Van reaches out and firmly grasps Colette's hand to steady her nerves as they arrive. He tells her he wants her to enjoy the ball but warns that someone will inevitably try to interfere. Colette looks at him with wide, startled eyes as the reality of the social battlefield sets in. Van gives her a final strict instruction to stay with Mimi if she must leave his side. He pulls her close, commanding her with deep protective instinct never to leave him. Colette softly agrees to his terms, her expression one of dazed compliance. She asks if he is truly okay before they prepare to congratulate the king and queen of Averilot. Van flashes a rare, confident smile and declares that as long as she is with him, he is more than fine. Colette looks away, pleading with him not to push himself too hard during the evening's festivities. He simply thanks her, his eyes softening at her genuine concern for his well-being. Van admits that without her influence, he would have likely slaughtered everyone responsible for the ambush already. Colette questions him with a look of worry, asking if he truly wouldn't resort to such violence anymore. She falls into a pensive silence, her profile showing the weight of the secrets they both carry. Van stares blankly for a moment, surprised by her sudden insight into his darker nature. Colette declares her belief in him, determined to see the man he has become rather than the one he was. She beams at him with a radiant smile, asking if he will stay with her forever. Clenching her hand, she vows internally to hold her head high and protect Van just as he protects her. The grand castle stands before them as Colette realizes she is finally no longer alone in her struggle. She takes comfort in the fact that Mimi and Euro are standing guard directly behind her. A shocked voice rings out across the ballroom as someone recognizes Colette in her fine attire. Her former family demands to know what she is doing in such a prestigious place. Colette sighs, noting that the encounter turned out exactly as she feared, though she no longer considers them family. They aggressively demand an explanation, asking what she could possibly want from them now. Colette stands her ground in silence, looking past them with a newfound sense of regal dignity. She turns away with a dismissive flick of her head, leaving her antagonist sputtering in shock. The woman's face contorts with absolute rage as she realizes she is being ignored. She screams about Colette's attitude, calling her pitiful and claiming she doesn't belong in such a place. The cruel family sneers at her, unable to imagine anything other than looking down on her as they always have. A sharp voice cuts through the noise, noting how awfully loud the group has become. Van steps forward and coldly asks the family if they have business with his wife. The man stammers in total disbelief at the word wife, while Van stares him down with lethal intent. Confusion erupts as the characters struggle to comprehend the unfolding chaos. Cruel accusations fly as Lillian claims the woman was shamelessly cavorting with another man in the capital. Realization begins to dawn regarding the true identity of the man from the capital, identified as Van. A man yells in disbelief, appalled that she would have the audacity to marry in such a brazen manner. Lillian sneers, accusing the woman of returning solely to enact revenge on the family. Laughing mockingly, Lillian notes how her meek and plain sister has returned looking like a true villainess. The family justifies their cruelty, asserting that kicking her out of the mangarecapped estate was the correct decision for such a filthy woman. The woman's eyes sharpen with a cold, intense focus as the insults continue to pile up. She firmly declares that she never once regretted leaving the house of mangarecapped because it was her own choice to depart. Maintaining her dignity, she flatly denies the slanderous implication that she is a courtesan. She demands an end to the public slander, speaking out in front of the husband she dearly loves. Her husband, visibly moved, expresses overwhelming happiness at being referred to as the husband she loves. As the husband celebrates his joy, others desperately try to calm the escalating situation. The woman's gaze remains steely and unyielding despite the chaotic reactions surrounding her. Lillian erupts in a jealous fury, screaming that she never agreed to an ending where her sister finds happiness after being thrown out. Seething with resentment, Lillian laments how incredibly unfair the situation has become. Driven to desperation, Lillian screams for her sister to trade places with her, declaring she no longer wants Dion. The crowd watches in stunned silence as the drama between the sisters unfolds across the hall. Dion stands nearby, visibly sweating and trembling as the situation spirals out of his control. The woman notices Dion's strange behavior, wondering exactly what has him looking so terrified. Lillian continues her desperate tirade, insisting that no attempt at revenge will ever work. The woman stands tall and composed, ignoring Lillian's command for her to know her place. Lillian rages with entitlement, screaming that someone like her sister can't be happy while she deserves everything. She continues her mental breakdown, obsessively claiming that every single thing should belong to her alone. Crying out in self-pity, Lillian asks why she is the one who has to suffer in this manner. As Lillian struggles and begs to be let go, her family members desperately try to restrain her. Suddenly shifting tactics, Lillian puts on a bright, manipulative smile while addressing the husband. She brazenly tells the man to forget her sister and choose her instead. Lillian shamelessly promotes herself, claiming to be both cuter and far more charming than her sister. She tries to entice him by promising he would be much happier if he simply picked her. With a final, desperate scream, she begs the man to choose her over her sister. The man lets out a weary sigh, noting that Lillian hasn't changed her selfish nature at all. Lillian interprets his attention as a victory, gleefully convincing herself that he has actually chosen her. A tense silence falls over the room as the man prepares to deliver a crushing blow to her delusions. With a chillingly calm demeanor, he asks if that pathetic display is truly all she has left to say. Lillian's smile falters into confusion as she fails to understand the shift in his tone. His expression turns terrifyingly dark as he reminds her that she mocked his wife back in the capital as well. The man's aura becomes lethal as he prepares to exert his true authority over the room. He reveals his terrifying status, declaring that he stands there today as the representative of the Shimei Emperor. He asks if they truly understand the consequences of insulting his wife twice in his presence. He offers a lethal ultimatum, questioning if losing their heads would be enough to take responsibility for their insults. Terrified, the family stammers out denials, realizing the gravity of their mistake. Duke Fervor makes his presence known, causing a stir among the panicked nobles. The Duke expresses his deep disappointment in Count Miriact as he prepares to intervene. With cold finality, it is declared that the engagement is now null and void, with the paperwork to follow. Duke Fervor prepares to depart, promising to return soon to offer formal apologies for the mess. The Duke offers a deep, formal apology for the behavior of the Miriact family. Before leaving, he mentions there is one more crucial matter that must be heard. Count Miriact looks on with a grim expression, asking what else could possibly be the matter. The man reveals a startling detail, stating that they were actually ambushed before arriving today. Van begins by offering a cold apology for the chaos that occurred within his kingdom. He reveals that the captured attackers all confessed to the same name, Toad. With a chilling expression, Van leans in and asks if they recognize the name of the one behind it. The accused man recoils in sheer terror, letting out a panicked shriek as the pressure mounts. Desperate and shaking, he stammers out a denial while his father looks on in shock. His father erupts in fury, calling him a fool and demanding he stop his pathetic display. Enraged, the father accuses his son of dragging the family name through the mud and demands to know how he will make amends. The son collapses in tears, the weight of the accusation breaking his spirit completely. He pathetically tries to shift the blame, sobbing that the attackers acted entirely on their own. Without a shred of mercy, the father offers his son up to Van, telling him to dispose of the boy however he pleases. The son screams in betrayal, realizing his own father is heartlessly abandoning him. Van looks on with a sharp, sideways glance, unimpressed by the father's attempt to settle the matter so easily. Turning his cold gaze toward the rest of the family, Van declares that the three of them standing silent are just as guilty. The sister and her parents tremble violently, paralyzed by the realization that they cannot escape his wrath. A woman looks on with a hollow smile, whispering a chilling, "Hey," as the tension reaches a breaking point. The desperate son turns to his sister, pleading for her to say something to save him. He begs her to speak up, pathetically reminding her that they are still family. Coldly turning her back, she declares that she has no ties left to these people because she is now married to Van. She reaffirms her loyalty, stating that Van is now her only true family. An authoritative voice suddenly booms through the hall, demanding to know the cause of all the commotion. The king and queen descend the grand staircase, surveying the chaotic scene unfolding below them. As Van looks on in silence, the disgraced son continues to mumble to himself that he isn't at fault. Colette stands firmly beside Van, offering him her unwavering support as he faces the royals. Van formally introduces himself, identifying his origins within the Shimei Empire. He stands at the base of the stairs, looking up at the high-ranking royals who once cast him aside. The queen points an accusing finger, labeling Van as the one responsible for disrupting the party. The king stares in visible horror, recognizing a familiar pair of violet eyes that should belong to the dead. Van thinks to himself that this moment provides the perfect excuse to seize the entire kingdom. He threatens to lodge a formal protest directly with the Shimei Emperor himself. Glancing back at the stunned crowd, Van muses that it is a pity they failed to finish him off years ago. With eyes narrowed in hatred, he vows never to forget the sins they committed when they tried to have him killed and erased from existence. The royals are left sputtering in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a man they thought was dead is standing before them. The memory of a small, lonely child flashes before the eyes of the guilt-stricken queen. Van reveals that after they discarded him, a benefactor saved his life and raised him into the man he is today. He declares with pride that he now serves the prosperity of the Shimei Empire. The queen loses her composure, screaming that he is lying through his teeth to protect herself from the truth. Van smirks, relishing the fact that he finally has the power to bring them all down. Looking out at the city, Van admits he initially considered burning the entire kingdom to ashes in revenge. His expression softens slightly as he explains that his wife did not wish to see her homeland erased. He points out the irony that his wife suffered the same fate of being scorned and oppressed by her own family. Van lists the humiliations she endured, including an attempt on her life by Dion Fervor and the insults of House Miriact. Clasping Colette's hand, he demands to know how they intend to justify such treatment. He scolds his sister for blaming him for her own failings and dismisses her claims as pure slander. The sister charges forward in a blind rage, unable to believe he would turn on his own family so ruthlessly. Screaming at the top of her lungs, she insists that all of this is entirely his fault. Colette watches in wide-eyed shock as the family she once knew descends into madness. Van gently calls Colette's name and asks her to close her eyes for a moment to shield her from what comes next. Colette trusts him implicitly, softly closing her eyes as she waits for the conflict to end. She whispers her agreement, prepared to let Van handle the final judgment. As guards move in to seize the disruptive sister, the long-standing reign of her family finally begins to crumble. Driven by a desperate need for a happy life, the antagonist laments that everything would have been perfect if only their orders had been followed. They envision a finally blissful existence, fueled by the hope that their previous commands would secure their future. Colette stares in stunned silence, her eyes wide with shock as the situation takes an unexpected and chilling turn. A brutal execution occurs in the shadows, punctuated by a cold and final goodbye as blood splatters across the dark room. Van calmly reassures Colette that the danger has passed, while the vast, empty halls of the palace loom behind them. Standing over a fallen foe, Van declares that he has personally delivered punishment to the House of Miriact and Dion Fervor for tormenting his wife. The royal family gasps in horror as they witness the aftermath of the swift and violent retribution. Consumed by rage and grief, a noble swears a blood oath that Van will pay dearly for the lives he has taken. Trembling with disbelief, the young man cries out, unable to comprehend how such a gruesome fate could befall Dion. Van maintains a stoic and piercing gaze, his expression unreadable as he confronts the trembling royalty. Holding Colette close, Van reveals his knowledge of their treasonous contract with Dion Fervor to have them assassinated. The king stammers in frantic denial, his face contorted with terror as the magnitude of his exposed crime sets in. Desperate to deflect blame, the noble claims he had no idea Dion would resort to such extreme measures. Van shuts down the pathetic display, coldly informing them that no amount of excuses will save them from the consequences. Presenting incriminating letters and proof of payment, Van systematically dismantles any remaining shred of their innocence. He sneers at the blindness of the Evalirut nobility for ever believing such a corrupt man was fit to lead. When a noblewoman dares to take offense at the insult to William, Van retorts with a sharp demand for silence. A terrifying smile plays on Van's lips as he offers to kill them next, his eyes glinting with a murderous intent. He leans in close, asking if they would like to die in the exact same manner they used to murder his mother. The queen is frozen in a mask of absolute terror, the color draining from her face as her past sins are laid bare. Van shifts his tone, identifying himself not just as a vengeful son, but as the official envoy of the powerful Shimei Empire. He formally introduces himself as Van Shimei, the formidable commander of the Empire's honor guard. He asks if they truly grasp the gravity of sending assassins against an imperial envoy and his wife. The ballroom falls into a heavy, suffocating silence as the gathered guests process the sudden shift in political power. The realization that their downfall is imminent leaves the conspirators spiraling into a pit of hopeless despair. Van promises they will suffer a slow, agonizing death by poison, mirroring the fate his mother was forced to endure. Pointing a finger at his next target, he declares with chilling certainty that their time has finally run out. The queen collapses onto the stairs, her spirit broken as the weight of her impending torture becomes a reality. He vows that the Shimei Empire's countless methods of torture will ensure they never grow bored of their own suffering. A desperate official begs Lord Van for the chance to atone for this grave error, hoping for a mercy that will not come. Van dismisses the plea immediately, stating with absolute coldness that he has no use for a worthless apology. The king looks on in a daze, his mind reeling as his authority vanishes in a single heartbeat. With an air of finality, Van proclaims that the kingdom of Ivalirut officially ends this very day. The king clutches a document in shock, his eyes bulging as he reads the official decree of his kingdom's dissolution. Van stands tall and declares to the room that the country now belongs entirely to him. He barks a single sharp command to his hidden guards to seize the traitors at once. Chaos erupts as imperial soldiers swarm the royals, ignoring their indignant cries to be released. Van watches with a detached, grim satisfaction as the queen is dragged away, her screams echoing through the hall. Turning his attention to the crowd, Van prepares to address the people while gently leading Colette away from the carnage. He reintroduces himself to the public, acknowledging Ivalirut as the homeland where both he and Colette were born. To calm the panicked masses, he swears an oath to preserve their way of life and protect their livelihoods under his new rule. Whispers ripple through the crowd as the commoners and lesser nobles try to make sense of the sudden revolution. Van reveals his true lineage as the first prince of Ivalirut, born of the late king and a mother from the Shimei Empire. Colette looks up at her husband, seeing the man she loves in a completely new and world-altering light. Not a single voice rises in protest as the people accept the transition of Ivalirut into a territory of the Shimei Empire. Van privately admits to Colette that it was her love that changed him, preventing the day from ending in far greater bloodshed. Despite the victory, Colette feels a pang of uncertainty, realizing Van still keeps many of his darkest secrets hidden from her. She wonders with a heavy heart if she is truly loved or if she is merely a piece in his grand, complex game. Sensing her doubt, Van reacts with genuine shock, his stoic mask slipping at the thought of her questioning his devotion. He thinks to himself that a life without Colette's pure and honest love would not be a life worth living at all. Colette resolves to become stronger so she can truly stand by his side forever, no matter what secrets he carries. Van stares at her with a softened expression, moved by her determination to face their uncertain future together. Embracing Colette in the garden, Van offers a heartfelt "thank you" as petals drift around them. To Colette's shock, she considers asking Mimi for combat training to better protect those she loves. She reasons that even a small amount of self-defense training would be a significant asset in their uncertain future. Van desperately begs Colette to cherish herself and avoid the dangers of the battlefield. Colette expresses her fear of seeing him hurt, only for Van to gently remind her that he feels the exact same way about her safety. With a look of solemn resolve, Van declares that his feelings and devotion mirror her own completely. Observers note that only Colette has the unique courage and standing to speak to Lord Van with such raw honesty. The political landscape has been decimated with the House of Mangarecapped and the royal family of Ivalirut all gone. Uncertainty hangs in the air as the characters contemplate the shattered future of the Ivalirut nation. In a bold move, Van announces his forceful intention to take over the government and rule the land himself. He reveals that the emperor has granted him a free lease to govern the territory as he sees fit. Colette realizes this means Van will become the king, yet he promises to maintain his composure for the sake of the realm. Van confesses that the country only holds meaning to him because it is the home of the woman he loves. Overwhelmed by his dedication, Colette offers a soft and sincere "thank you" to her future king. Colette looks on with a serene, beautiful smile that radiates her quiet strength and happiness. Donning his royal robes and crown, Van stands before the castle as the official ruler destined to lead the nation. He lets out a light chuckle, viewing his new station as a well-earned reward for the struggles they have endured. Van looks Colette in the eye and swears a lifelong oath to protect her above all else. Matching his resolve, Colette beams as she vows to grow strong enough to protect him in return. The two share a tender embrace on the palace steps, finally united and ready to face their future together forever.